You're listening to a 4x4 Radio Network podcast.
The Centresteer Podcast, a Land Rover podcast by Land Rover owners. Welcome to the Centresteer Podcast, the only Land Rover podcast on the planet. This is show number 42 for September 2016. This is the second take for the podcast. I'm not going to explain why. This is a podcast by, for, and about Land Rover owners. Visit our website at centresteer.com to listen to previous shows and look for the show notes. We'll have links to the stories that we discussed today, and you can also listen to previous shows. We're also part of the 4x4 Radio Network, and I invite you to check out the other 4x4 related shows at 4x4radio.com. They had me on as a guest this week. And
is it 4x4radio.com or 4x4radionetwork.com?
It is 4x4radionetwork.com.
Okay, very good.
Did I misspeak?
Yes.
Okay, thanks for correcting me. I'm your host, John Costage, here in wonderful southwestern Pennsylvania on a wonderful autumnal day. The weather was absolutely perfect. I don't think you could ask for a better day.
Well, you can ask. You may not get it.
Absolutely. You're right. And it was a great day. Sitting across from me is...
As usual, I'm Harold.
He's here in the studio. Thanks for showing up, Harold, and helping join us on the podcast.
I'll send you a bill later.
I know. And we also have Morgan all the way from the wonderful Green Mountain State.
Yes, and we got just a beautiful August. Wow, second recording is a little harder.
Take two.
And we got a beautiful autumn day as well.
Did you? Good. That's good. That's have the leaves started to change yet?
There's a couple of trees that have changed, but we've got sort of all our harvest festivals this weekend and went apple picking and the usual stuff. So
gotcha. Ours doesn't start for another week or two. So. Our guest this month is Terry Ann Wakeman. She's a legend in the North American Land Rover scene and community.
If you don't know who she is, you don't belong on our show.
And she wrote a new book called The Essential Guide to Overland Travel in the United States and Canada, a resource for independent travel and camping. I did read the book, and it is wonderful. Picked up a lot of tips, a lot of ideas, things to think about if you're going to overland. Admittedly, it says, in the United States and Canada, but a lot of the information applies anywhere in the world that you might be traveling. It's kind of evergreen in that way.
And this is all based on her experience. She's been overlanding in her dormobile for a very long time.
Since the 70s.
Like I said, a very long time.
And while she has gained this experience in Land Rovers, it is not a vehicle-specific book, so a good resource all around.
That's true, yeah. It's vehicle agnostic in that regard, although she is a big Land Rover fan. She also has
you will get the most out of it if you're a Rover person.
So stay tuned to the show to listen to Terry Ann's interview. We'll also have an M word from Harold, which will talk about not destroying your 109 transmission for the sixth time. That's all. I think that's all we need to say, right?
It might discuss something like that.
At least heavily implied.
We also launched our Patreon account. Patreon is a simple way for you to support the podcast. It'll help to keep the podcast going and encourage us to do more things, like go to the Overland Expo show, which I will be doing here in a week and a half or so. Already have one contributor. His name is Steve, and he travels to Africa quite often, and he joined us at the driver level, which means we'll invite him on the show very soon.
Cool.
And he'll be getting a sticker or two. New stickers are on the way, newly designed stickers. These are going to be, a design is going to be only available in sticker form. I'm not going to put it on the web, so we'll still continue with the logo we have for the web. And they are supposed to be in my hands tomorrow on the 26th of September. So hopefully by the time this podcast is out, I'll have them in my hand and be able to send them out to Patreon folks. So go out to Patreon and /Centresteer.com for more details, and if you would like to make a monthly contribution. We thank you very much. Thanks to Steve for being our first Patreon.
Is there an option as well for a one-time contribution if someone didn't necessarily want to be a monthly contributor?
No, I don't think so.
We may need to set something up for that.
I mean, I like the notion of monthly subscriptions, but if someone wasn't able to do that, but they still wanted to, even throw a few bucks our way once, that would be nice if they could do that. 'Cause we'll take money however we can get it, because it costs money to put on a podcast.
Indeed, it does. Yeah, I'll look into that. Maybe I think there probably is, but I think their model is more geared toward that monthly subscription idea.
Well, yeah, much better if you can have the Chicago election model. Contribute early, contribute often.
Thank you. All right, let's get into the news. First up, JLR sales for September 2016 in North America, well, in the U.S. specifically. Some interesting information there. One is that JLR sales were up 46% over for this August over last August. And a couple of things to point out. First is the Range Rover Sport diesel sales. They sold 444 units for the month. At least that's what I read, which I think is a fantastic stat.
That's certainly a very good start.
Correct. The rest of the line does not yet have the diesel available for it here in the U.S.
Well, if the Range Rover Sport has good sales results, maybe they'll consider putting it in other stuff.
Good point. So that was, by the way, 15% of Range Rover overall sales. I'm sorry, I misspoke. Range Rover and Range Rover Sport are both have a diesel option. So. Also, I found this interesting. The Disco Sport sold 1,038 units in August, while the Jaguar F-Pace sold 1,222 units. So the F-Pace sold 200 more units than the Disco Sport for the month. So how's that for selling an SUV? For a non-SUV typical company. You're looking at me. Why are you
trying to find something nice to say about that, and it's not coming to me.
Yeah.
In case people have not listened to our show before, I am not a fan of Jaguar producing SUVs.
Well, but all other companies are doing it now. The Porsche sold an SUV. Now the
Porsche
Bentley's
does
coming
not
out
have a sister division that makes the best 4x4 by far.
Yes,
Porsche has to make an SUV to compete. Jaguar does not.
Well, the market seems to indicate they sold a lot of units. I mean, that was that was almost, I think, half of Jag sales. Jag sales were almost 3,300 units.
At the expense of how many Land Rover sales?
Well, Land Rover sales were also up 15%.
Right,
they sold 6,000 units.
How much more would they have been up if those sales had not been lost to the F-Pace, which did not need to be built?
Well, I don't know. That seems to be the way the market's going. So
well, they're all in combined dealerships now. You walk in the door, you're going to see Jags on one side of the floor, Land Rovers on the other side of the floor. Jaguar does not need an SUV because once they're in the door, they're going to buy something.
But isn't the F-Pace, though, is not just a rebadged Land Rover, to be sure. I mean, they did take their own.
They have some stuff that's original, but there's a lot of shared technology.
And it's based on the Range Rover Sport, right?
Well, I don't think it's really based on anything, but it looks like an Evoque that's been rebadged, but it's a little more than that.
Okay.
But I don't think it's distinctive enough relative to the Land Rovers to justify it being its own product, and I think it really just takes away from the Land Rover side of the business. I'm not a big fan of sister divisions competing with each other because it was at the heart of all that was wrong with General Motors in the 60s and 70s.
And 80s.
Well, I'm being generous here, but the start of the downfall actually was in the 50s.
Right. Yeah, everything would look the same, and you just would rebadge it.
Well, but in the 50s, there was a lot of pressure from top management to make each division perform, and before long you had Buicks competing with Cadillacs, competing with Oldsmobiles, and everybody had to perform and be the sales leader, and they started cutting into each other's sales because they were not able to distinguish those brands from each other well enough.
No, I'd agree with that.
Bad brand management, and I think that it's a dangerous course that Jag is heading towards by offering something that Land Rover is arguably the best at.
And it's not like some of the other marques that do a similar thing, like Toyota and Lexus, because while those vehicles are pretty much rebadged versions, the Lexus ones are obviously the higher class models, whereas with Land Rover and Jaguar, they're shooting for the same market.
Right. The Lexus and the Toyota it's a different segment of the car buying population, and quite often it's a separate dealer network. Whereas, I mean, Jag and Land Rover in this country is almost universally a combined dealer.
Yeah.
To your point, in my head at least, it seems that the Range Rover Sport is more taking Jag sales away, because it seems to be the very fast, the very quick. That's the when you think of Jag, typically you're thinking of speed, and you're thinking of racing typically, and that seems almost like what the Range Rover Sport is kind of intended.
Except that the Range Rover Sport came first.
But not to Jag cars though. That's. So if you liked an SUV, or you wanted something raised and up higher, and you wanted to go fast, you got to...
Actually, the Range Rover Sport predates the combined JLR entity.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Right. But
and they were making sporty SUVs before Jag was. Jag horned in on the SUV market, which to me takes away from the Range Rover Sport.
But isn't I guess the point I'm trying to make is, isn't Land Rover horning in on the speed market that Jag had by getting into that side of it, being an on-road fast vehicle? Its focus is more being fast and on-road than it is to be off-road and off-road capable.
But even with the speed, it's more of like a luxury family vehicle,
It's a luxury version of what they already do. They're not inventing a new sector. It's not like Range Rover decided to build sports cars.
Right.
Give them time.
Well, and that will be another step in the wrong direction. I will disagree with that as wholeheartedly. Stick to what you're good at. Stick to what you're known for, and don't cut off your sister's head just to do more stuff. Well,
we'll see what happens in the next few years, and how sales are, and what that means to the rest of the brand, I guess. Yeah. JLR drops the Ford engine as it expands the Ingenium family. So that's just one of the engines that Ford is producing for them. They have a contract that runs through 2020, and they are replacing the Ford's 2.2-liter diesel they've already replaced that one. They're going to replace another engine now. This is going to be the turbocharged, turbocharged V6, if I remember correctly, as I'm trying to scan the article and talk at the same time. Ford will continue to build a V6 diesel, a V6 supercharged gas, and a V8 supercharged gasoline engine for JLR. And JLR is expected to replace the V6 engine, there we go, with their own V6 from the Ingenium family.
And I recently saw, related to the Ingenium engine, Land Rover showed off one of the new Ingenium engines that has integrated exhaust headers into the head. Thought that was an interesting change.
Well, it might allow them to reduce weight and make the engine more compact. I'm not sure if it's going to do anything wonderful for the longevity of the head assembly.
Yeah, probably not.
Has that been done before?
Oh, about 75 years ago.
Yeah, it's not common.
Not recently.
Well, has metals and alloys gotten better that they can handle the stress and the...
Yeah. Manufacturing has gotten better. I mean, a lot of things have gotten better. I'm just not sure if it's a good idea or not.
And obviously, the Ingenium engine is heavily computer controlled. So, I think they expect longevity to be gained by, accurate controlling of the engines running.
Certainly helps. But I think there's also a move towards engines being a disposable assembly.
Yep.
They aren't meant to be serviced and repaired as much as they used to be.
Well, we'll find out more at Paris Auto Show. That's when they're going to talk more about the engine, and apparently the thought is it might go into the new Disco, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Keeping in with power plants, There was an article coming out of Europe. They talked to a executive in Europe, JLR's German CEO. Talked to him, and it kind of boils down to that Jaguar will get EVs, electric vehicles, and Land Rover will handle hybrids, gas, diesel hybrids. So that seems to be the split between the two families.
I like that. I think it makes sense to put the hybrid in the Rover because they're going to be going pretty deep in the woods potentially where there are no charging stations.
Right.
So you can, if you have a 5-gallon can of something, you can pour it in the tank and get yourself back home again.
Much faster than sitting at a station and charging for half an hour.
Well, not only that, but I mean it's even possible. I mean, if you run out of electrons out in the woods, and you're kind of screwed.
Right. Yeah. Even if you have a solar panel.
Oh yeah, put a solar panel up and wait a week.
Right. And if there's any tree cover, you're done.
And the thing is, the battery packs are not something you can hot swap either. They're integrated deep into the vehicle, so it's not like you can just bring a spare battery and plug it in, or bring a bucket of electrons and pour it in. It's
no. Oh, that's hydrogen. I think that's hydrogen.
Yeah.
That's another way of doing it. Another kind of alternative transport, alternative power plant.
It's alternative fuel is what that's called.
Right, there we go. So,
yep. I still like the idea of, an electric Land Rover just to have the concept or, have one executed. They've done some test vehicles with the Defender platform, which obviously is now over and done with as we know it.
I like to think that test program resulted in the decision to put a hybrid in the Land Rover lines.
Yeah, I agree. I do think that the hybrid is better suited for Land Rover, so I look forward to seeing more of those.
Electric vehicles are an awesome technology to use for a vehicle that's just running around town and going shopping. Because you can plug in at a charging station that might be conveniently located at your local donut shop or at the mall or the movie theater or whatever.
Right. Yeah, in fact, the Dunkin' Donuts in our neck of the woods here has to set up electric charging stations. The one down the road from me in Jeanette, PA, of all places, you can now charge up.
Yeah, I'm not so sure I'd want to be sitting in Jeanette long enough to charge anything.
It's right off of Route 30.
Jeanette's a good place to drive through, and that's about it.
With all due respect to
my apologies to the people who live there, but
it's it's an interesting town, but.
Not exactly a highly desirable area to live.
Not at the moment. I'd agree. But yeah, your point's taken though. It's the speed of getting it charged up, and then what you use the vehicle for. And let's face it, most people are using their vehicle, whether it's a Land Rover or not. They're not going off road. They're not going deep into the outback. They're not going into the mountains. So even if Land Rover did go down an all electric vehicle route, I think most people would still use it, around town, and would get good use out of an all electric vehicle.
Although if the hybrid is done properly, it's as good as the electric, and you can still use that in town if you want.
Right.
Well, and the recharging is much quicker.
Well, it happens as you're driving, right?
Right. It recharges the battery while you drive, but then you put the fuel in for that process very, very quickly.
Right.
Yeah, and if there's a plug-in hybrid option, that's obviously even better, because when you're, like you said, at the grocery store or something like that, you can plug in and it will still charge even more. Same when you're at home.
Well, that's the correct way to do a hybrid, and I did say if it's done correctly.
Yes.
A hybrid vehicle done correctly is an electric vehicle with an onboard internal combustion charging system.
Yep. Yeah. Now, maybe with this sort of separation of electric going to Jaguar and, hybrids going to Land Rover, maybe that's a reason for the F-Pace, that at some point down the road, it'll become the electric SUV and Land Rovers will be the hybrids.
Well, at that point, you've done something to distinguish your two brands. You don't have as much overlap in that sense. You've stepped back towards proper brand management.
Absolutely. We'll have to see if it happens.
Good point. Stay tuned. We'll maintain watch on this one. Moving along, and probably the biggest Land Rover news we have of the last few months is that the new Discovery is coming out. We'll be debuting this week, I think September 28th at the Paris Motor Show. It's a Discovery 5. aside from it being revealed, I think the best news is that the LR4 name, LR5, if it potentially is gone from North America, we don't have to hopefully hear that. That designation. I never liked it. I'm glad it's going back to the Discovery.
Finally.
Home market names are usually better for most cars.
So are they? But they're still selling the LR2, right?
No, LR2. Well, if they are, they're just getting rid of them. The Disco Sport replaced that.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's been removed.
Because the LR2 was the Freelander, and they're finally replacing that with the Disco Sport.
Well,
Right.
and the other thing is that the LR2 wasn't a Land Rover specific platform. That was a shared platform with Volvo, which Land Rover is no longer a sister division of.
Yeah, it was part of that started
under the Ford Premier Automotive Group.
Right.
Yep.
So they only showed the very front of the Disco 5. It's in copper, and they'll have a full reveal. But they did also release a video that was called which one is this? This is the off-road capability testing. And it was in the camouflage that Harold likes. Well, you don't like the specific camouflage,
Well,
though.
I like the notion of camouflage. Maybe not this particular pattern, but yeah, I do like the notion of camouflage. And I believe that should be an option available.
Hopefully they're listening, and they will
choose from because nowadays the number of color offerings has gotten so slim. So if they had the 3 or 4 colors plus the development camo as an additional option, that would be cool.
And if you look at the Disco 5 in the development camo, you can stop the video, or you can just look at it. You'll see the general outlines of the vehicle, the whole thing, and
enough to know that it does not look
enough to know that
distinguishable from the other models.
It does not look distinguishable from previous Discos. There's no step roof line. Doesn't seem to be any stadium seating.
Well, in that sense, it is distinguishable from previous models because it does not look at all like anything that came before it. It looks like all the other models of the Land Rover.
It looks like they took a Disco Sport and blew into it and made it bigger.
They just grabbed the corner of the screen and dragged it out.
That's right.
Until it was the size they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Just, what is it, shift drag, and you get it kept in proportion?
Something like that.
That's right. And you use control, and you can make copies. It's that easy. It's that easy. Harold and I were talking about this before the podcast. There seems to be and we should do some investigation, but I suspect we'll only talk about it. But there seems to be a high correlation between technology-type people and Land Rovers. And, like we all knew control and shift and...
A disproportionate share of Rover people are at least, if not present, former computer geeks.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, but all 3 of us are in the computer field or have been at one time, so it shows something there. Along the lines of the Disco 5, though, I think Harold has asked for camo to be a color choice option. And so it's possible that they are listening to us because they came out with a different camo one that you might like, Harold. It's called the Kids Camouflage. So they took some Land Rover executives and had kids, brought them into a room, and they went ahead and made some drawings, and they slapped it on the side of the new Disco 5 and put a video out.
Yeah, my question is whether that was deliberate or not. It might have been bring your kid to work day, and then they forgot and left the kids unsupervised with a pile of Sharpies next to a white Disco.
That'll teach them not to use, whiteboard markers.
And that
would teach them not to leave children unsupervised in the studio.
And that would explain why they had no actual cars to show debut, and they had only show the development ones. Is all the one they had that they could show the kids.
The one nice one they were planning to use, the children ruined it.
That's right. So
it's kind of cool. I mean, it's nice graphic, artsy sort of thing, but yeah.
Yeah, I was actually surprised that Land Rover had used the development camo so heavily in their recent marketing, because usually that's just sort of exposed to, like, through media.
I think that maybe
not necessarily like spy shots, not necessarily actually pushed by marketing.
I think maybe that's why. I think it was sort of a pop culture reference, if you will, to the fact that the first time you see stuff, it's almost always in spy shots on somebody's magazine. And so they sort of said, well, we're going to do that in a big way with our marketing.
Yep.
So it also goes to show, as we've said before, Land Rover does great marketing. I think this goes along with, really good marketing. They are releasing information. They do it in dribs and drabs. And they do it in a certain stylized way. And we talked about that last month with a company whose name I forget, but helps them out with their marketing. And I think that's probably along the same lines. So.
And what I like is that their marketing team not only is real slick and they do these things really, really well, they also seem to have an eye on their heritage to a certain extent. And it comes to mind the reboot of the Rover being winched up the dam commercial.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Wonderful to do that with the Disco 5. You think they'll winch it up?
Well, I don't know. I think they've done it. I think they did it. Just a few years ago, they did it as a remake of the old one.
Right, they did. And when Top Gear did their version, and then they also did a remake of the original.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and clearly this kids themed camo is their sort of tip of the hat to their new market, which is really family SUVs.
Right, the whole 7-seater thing for putting the kids in the back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is really what they did. They took the Disco Sport, which had 5 seats. They blew into it with an air gun and made it bigger, and I got 2 more seats. No? Okay.
Actually, they've had 7-seaters out since '94.
Yeah.
Yep.
With the old D1s.
And then the D2 line, the SE7s were 7-seaters.
Were they always side-facing seats, or did they?
They were side-facing in the D1. They were forward-facing in the D2.
Forward-facing. They never had rear-facing, did they?
No.
Okay.
No. But the D2s were forward-facing with a little headrest that folded down out of the headliner, so you didn't bash your head on the rear window.
Oh, that's right. I remember.
Right, and in the non-SE7 models, those were just storage bins in place of where the seats were.
Which was much more useful than the 7 seats.
Yep.
So. All right, moving on from the D5, we'll talk about something here that I think folks in North America will not really understand, but I think the rest of the world will. So JLR is partnering with a company which I think is called Rockar, and they're going to launch a new digital retail website and accompanying store in Westfield Stratford Shopping Complex to be the first premium automotive brand to offer fully online purchasing. So you'll be able to design, select, and purchase a car all online. You can also, I guess, go to the store to get help and then do that online.
So with a retail store and an online presence, it's kind of like Saturn meets Tesla.
Yes, exactly. Except they're going to call their product experts angels. I suspect Genius was taken.
Yeah, they might have had a copyright thing.
I know for our North American listeners, this is like completely confusing to some degrees, and we should probably explain to our non-North American, at least non-U.S. listeners, how you buy a car in the U.S. or how you don't buy a car in the U.S.
Well, I was actually along those lines. One of the distinctions you mentioned angels are the people who are staffing these new retailers. That is a big distinction from who manages the North American dealers, because we call those piranhas.
So in the U.S., by law, you have to buy an automobile through a dealer, at least a new car through a dealer. You can do used cars, can be private sales, but so the manufacturer sells the vehicle to a dealership, and the dealership turns around and sells it to you. And that's been the process since the 40s or 50s. It wasn't in the beginning. I think it was direct sales in the beginning.
Well, I know in the 20s you could buy it from the company, or you could buy your car and become a dealer.
Because
my great-grandfather did that.
That's cool. Well, I think, if I remember right, the reason that they ended up with this dealer system was that there were so many different manufacturers, and they were such a poor reliability and quality. They weren't supporting their customers. At least that was the perception. And so they ended up creating the dealer system in order to kind of give some reliability in sales and support to the process. I think that's how that started. And it was, I think that would.
Well,
I think it was in
and
the 30s
people want to buy from a local business. At least back then they did. People wanted to buy from somebody they knew and theoretically could trust. Yeah. So if you had a presence in town that was in the business of selling these things, you would go there and you would get it from him.
Right.
But this dealer is an independent businessman. He's not an employee of the company. He's buying the product from the manufacturer, and he's putting his markup on it. and he really sets the price. It's about negotiating your deal with them. So the price you see on the window of the car is not necessarily the price you will pay. That is the manufacturer's suggested retail price, the MSRP. And the real number is to be determined between you and the salesman. Unfortunately, that's become a whole multi-stage Dancing with the Stars sort of thing. You've got round one with the piranha that's gotten you hooked, and then you work a deal with him. He goes and sees his manager, and then another round, that goes to round two, another number comes back, and then it goes to that manager's manager, sometimes all the way to the general sales manager before you get the real number you're going to pay.
And then you get to work with their finance manager.
F&I. Finance and insurance.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Whose job is not only to get your money and fill out the paperwork, but also try to upsell the protection package and the extended
Undercarriage.
warranty.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All that stuff.
Any of the high markup things that they can make a few more bucks on before you leave.
Suffice to say, in the U.S., purchasing a car is generally unpleasant, especially when you look at how you can buy almost everything else fairly easily. You know what you're getting when you're buying the price. You may not like the price, but you know what you're getting, and you can shop apples to apples for the most part.
Well, there's much more transparency to it. It's
That's
the not knowing what the actual number is or needs to be that's most difficult.
Although, I think thanks to the internet, that has been changing over the years, where people now know a better sense of what the price is. Of course, manufacturers put out the MSRP, manufacturers set the retail price, and I think manufacturers, one of the reasons they like doing that, and I think they also probably on the side let people know what the real costs are, because
they may leak that information.
Right, because I think they know their customers don't like it. They know that now I would suspect that Ford and General Motors would like to sell directly to their customers if they could, because it would be a relatively easy experience, better experience also for their customers. But
and there are other marks that are pushing forward with that, trying to make it so that the MSRP is the actual buying price. So bringing those prices down a little bit, but then also trying to enforce them through their own dealer networks. I believe that Scion is one of the companies doing that, and there are probably others coming on board.
Scion is going out of business, though, aren't they? Didn't they kill Scion? And it just is like, I think Saturn was doing that. That's why Harold made that reference earlier.
Right.
It was a General Motors.
Saturn was very much a no haggle division.
Mm-hmm. That was
right.
You got the price was the price, and
mostly. I mean, there was a little room, but yeah, mostly the price was the price, and there was a lot less. The dealers were specially trained and instructed not to play the game.
Right. Yep. So. But
I hadn't heard that Scion was going away, so
I think I saw it a couple months ago. I think Scion's
I believe they have killed that division.
Yeah, I think they're just.
It makes sense. That was their. Scion was Toyota, Lexus.
It was meant to be the young people's Toyota division, and as it turned out, they were a bigger hit with old folks than the kids.
Yeah, absolutely, right.
Yeah, and clearly, we've seen some mixed results and information on whether millennials want to drive, are interested in vehicles and stuff. So it's a hard market, and I think that's why towards the end there, I guess they were shooting for this fixed pricing, so that kids could just go on the internet, search for the price, and that was the price.
Yeah.
But sounds like a little too late.
I don't think so. I think most people.
Most people want that.
Most people
anyway.
want that because they don't like buying a car. They don't want to haggle. That's just not our way that we've developed here in the U.S. It's just not
dealing with a car salesman, a professional car salesman, is I think just one notch up the desirability level to going to the dentist.
Yeah, or dealing with a divorce lawyer. Yeah, it's unpleasant.
Well, dealing with a divorce lawyer is actually more avoidable than either the dentist or the car salesman.
Another little interesting wrinkle to throw into car buying, especially here in Pennsylvania, is that you cannot buy a new car on Sunday. That has just been outlawed. That's one of our last leftover blue laws here in Pennsylvania. So no new car sales on Sunday. You can go look, and there'll be a salesman there probably just hanging out, maybe give you a card. But
usually not, actually. Most dealers don't even have anybody on site.
Oh, they don't do that
Sunday
anymore? Okay, they used to. They used to be able to. You might have a sales guy.
I used to work in private security way back when I was between jobs, and one of my jobs was to patrol a dealer. You'd let them walk around, but beyond that, you just kind of made sure that they move along. And there were certain parts of the lot they weren't allowed to go, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I've seen salespeople at certain lots on Sundays, and they still hand out a card.
That may be independent. They're just doing it on their own because they're trying to bring their commission up. But it's not necessarily a policy of the dealer.
Right. So online sales and retail purchase is apparently coming to Europe, and maybe someday will come to the U.S.
It's more difficult in the U.S. because the U.S. is not just one country when it comes to the regulations. We're 50 states plus D.C., and every state has their own consumer protection laws that regulate the sales of cars.
Yeah, Tesla ran into that here. Because
they
are direct sales.
Yeah, they're suing Michigan right now, and they're here in PA. But you can go to. There's one place near Pittsburgh where you can go, but you can look. No buying. All you can do is look and take it for a test drive, I think.
Yep.
Anyway, so they're just that's the world of purchasing, which is also interesting. Talk about it. I thought it was worth talking about. They're spending. They're investing £1 billion in the UK on their existing 201 UK retailer network. They want to create a premium showroom experience. Also in the news, and this is not directly related to Land Rover itself, but it's something we've been following that we like talking about, and that is autonomous cars. In addition to the fact that here where we live in Pittsburgh, Uber has started their autonomous cars in downtown Pittsburgh. I have not seen one yet.
Pittsburgh is a hub of development for that technology, is it not?
It is. Uber, that's because of CMU. CMU had the Robotics Institute.
Right.
Uber set up shop next door, and so they claim. They don't claim. They started poaching a bunch of the robotics engineers, and when it got too many, CMU kind of went and said, "Hey, you're taking all our people." They're like, "Hey, we'll partner with you." So now they're a partner, and they opened up a big facility right next to the Robotics Institute down there, and they're now working together. And
amazing how many problems can be fixed with a large donation.
Yes, exactly. But this article, autonomous cars, I like the concept. The reason that I wanted to talk about it is it's going to I think the autonomous cars will have as much effect and an impact on society as the car did itself. This article's headline...
It's certainly going to change the way we look at cars and think about them.
Absolutely, I'm glad you agree. This article
whether or not you like that is another issue.
Right, absolutely. And I think most people that listen to this podcast and most people that probably off-road certainly like cars. They enjoy cars. They're driving people. They want to drive. Autonomous cars, though, are going to go towards people who typically don't like to drive and see it as just transportation. This article indicates that they see 10 million jobs disappearing, reshaping the economy by 2025, which is not that far away, maybe 9 years or so. It may or may not be far away. But I think there's going to be a lot of things that are going to happen that maybe some folks haven't thought about. Trucks are probably going to be, I think, one of the first things are going to be truly autonomous and will drive goods across the highways, maybe at night in trains. I probably mentioned that before. But there's going to be changing in jobs. There's going to be changing in how you get a car. It's going to become cars as service. There's going to be less, I think, ownership of cars. That's going to change the whole dealership network too, as a result of that.
Well, it's going to sidestep the dealership network for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Because who's going to be buying cars then? It's going to be a company that's going to buy them. You'll have a share of that.
Well, there's one guy in the dealership whose job is secure. He's the guy that sells. It's a fleet manager. Right. He sells large quantities of vehicles to a company. He's going to have a job still, definitely.
Or not. Because you could, unless they change the rules or change the laws, if I get a car from, let's say, Uber because I need to get to work every day, I might get it through Uber. That car may be licensed out of Chicago, or it might be licensed out of Florida. That doesn't have to be licensed out of Pennsylvania.
Right, but there's going to be somewhere with that job. That job's not going to go away.
Yeah, there may only be one.
He may be working for the corporation, but he's the guy that's selling the vehicles to the.
Or it might be manufacturer selling right to Uber.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The guy may work for the manufacturer.
Yeah. I just see the whole dealership things might collapse.
It might.
Yeah, just as a result of that.
It might.
But
and that depends on how many non-autonomous vehicles are still out there, and whether we're allowed to still have cars for recreational or art collecting purposes,
or even just daily use.
Yeah.
I don't think that'll go away. I mean, that's my opinion.
I don't think
of
it's going to
course.
go away quickly. I think it's sort of, utopian, futuristic sort of view to think that, the public is not going to be able to have cars at all anymore.
Yeah, I don't see that changing.
Yeah, I think here in the U.S. especially, there are two things that three we really want are guns, alcohol, and cars, and those are not gonna.
What about apple pie?
The difference is there is no constitutional amendment guaranteeing this the right to keep and bear cars.
That's true.
They can take them from us at any time.
Yeah, so big changes I think are coming, and I don't know that the average individual. I think people listening to this podcast probably have thought about it, and may not, and it will, but it will definitely impact everybody. It's coming. Just something to think about. Something to, if you have thoughts on autonomous cars and their impact on society, let us know. Say something in a tweet or an email. The hope is that it will reduce crashes and deaths possibly by 90%. I don't think you'll ever get to zero on that, but the human driver certainly is. It may not be the best driver down the road. Whether it's now or 5 or 10 or 15 years, I think the computer will certainly do a better job than humans will.
When the computer's working properly.
And there are
the stability and reliability of the computer is the big concern
and security too.
That's what I'm saying. If something happens either through accident, damage, or someone hacking in, and the computer is no longer doing its job properly, the vehicle becomes pretty dangerous if the driver, the person, is not still there and fully involved to be able to intervene.
Right. Yeah. Although that can happen right now. I actually know that he now works for Uber. The guy that hacked into the Jeep that was in Tennessee, he was from Pittsburgh, and he's now working for Uber in their security division. So it could happen now. It's a little more difficult in the sense of affecting more than, say, one vehicle, but it's certainly been proven.
Well, but once they become prolific, the threat of a security incident becomes a much bigger deal.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, and with companies like Land Rover working on vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure communications, there's advantages there in the safety and management side, but obviously risks as well.
Well, I think that if there was a way to program the computer, the onboard management system, whatever you want to call it, with something akin to Asimov's first law, some sort of low-level function that preserves life regardless, and make that something that cannot be changed and is not in touch with the rest of the computer systems. Maybe it's a separate machine that has no electronic connection of any sort, something that will override and take control so that there is no way to bring it down. And the problem is that anything at all causes that onboard system to crash, and the vehicle is no longer safe.
Right, absolutely. Same thing.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because Asimov's 3 rules of robotics. Generally, the stories did not work out all that well, but it's very much the same.
I use that term loosely.
Yes, very much so.
Just to get you thinking, and to give our geeky friends a thrill.
But it's true for us humans too. I mean, that's why we have so many accidents, is because anything that distracts the driver, and suddenly the vehicle is very dangerous. And computers are a little harder to distract.
Well, they're harder to distract, but they are easier to repurpose. It's harder to repurpose a human in the sense of telling it, making
Yes.
it.
Well, you
rule.
can change a human's programming, and you can get a human to think that it would be cool to kill people, but it takes a lot longer.
Yes, right. That's my point.
It takes months, not nanoseconds.
Right.
Yep. Another interesting thing that article had in here that we've talked about before, and actually more off the podcast, but the ancillary industries and how much they may be impacted. There's a $198 billion automotive insurance market. There's a $98 billion automotive finance market, a $100 billion parking industry, $300 billion automotive aftermarket market. These may collapse or as their services evaporate, or certainly they're going to change. Rental car companies, public transportation will change. Even speeding tickets might be eliminated, and so will actually DUIs could hopefully be eliminated. There's a lot of things that could potentially happen. It's not just a simple change. Adding when you added the automatic braking, that's okay. That's a minor change. It's a good thing. It'll probably be generally good, but the impact is relatively minimal compared to having the whole vehicle that's not under human control anymore and can just go off and do. Anyways, interesting topic. No answers here. We'll see what happens. I enjoy the topic. As a person who likes driving, I enjoy that every moment I get in the car.
And a person who likes gadgets.
Yeah, in many ways it's tough for me because I do like driving and I do like gadgets. But I do, when I get in the car and I drive, I enjoy the moment. Because
although there are times perhaps when you might want to let the gadget do the driving for you.
I refer you to one M word. Apparently, are you referencing a 109?
No, I'm just thinking about your desire to go out and check out beer establishments,
breweries and such. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would probably drink more.
It can you could enjoy yourself without worry of drinking too much, and then it would bring you home.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. There's a hybrid vehicle in a different way might be nice down the road where I could drive, and then when I don't want to or can't, pop it into auto mode.
Sort of like cruise control.
Yes, or autopilot as Tesla calls it.
Yeah.
All right, why don't we move on?
Mind you, that autopilot system has had some crashes already.
Yeah, I did.
In the one case, it's set up so that the driver is supposed to still be there and be able to take control and have his hands near the wheel. And this particular guy was watching a movie.
Yeah, they think. That was never, I don't know, was that proven that he was watching something?
I thought I read somewhere that, there was a player and it was still running at the crash.
Yeah, it was proven. There was a software glitch at the same time that under certain lighting conditions, in that accident, what happened was a semi-truck turned across the lane in front of him, and the camera software in that particular daylight could not recognize that wasn't just sky because it was a blank white truck.
There was not sufficient contrast for it to make the optical distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But, like we said, the advantage of computers, they were able to apply changes to that camera software, push them out wirelessly to the vehicles. So, it's...
Hey, they bought the company, too.
Nothing like using the public as your R&D department.
Yeah.
Well, and they tell you that, though. They tell you that. It's not like you don't know that that's happening. Moving on in the news, special congratulations to Australia. The Land Rover Owners Club of Australia Sydney branch is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. And as a matter of fact, they're celebrating it right now. There's an event taking place. I think it's called the Land Rover Expo, Owners Expo. And it is taking place on Sunday, the 25th of September, 2016, from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., which admittedly, they are half a world away and a hemisphere away from us, but
and 2 seasons away.
And 2 seasons away. But congratulations to them, to that club, to that entire club. 50 years, that's 20 years after Land Rover started and still going strong. Congratulations to them. That's a good thing. And there are some pictures that we saw from that event, thanks to one of our listeners who is in Australia, Oren. He lives, I think, in New South Wales. That's NSW, right? New South Wales?
Correct.
And he posted a bunch of 60 pictures or so, all different kind of Land Rovers and some ones I've never seen before. Pretty interesting. So
they get all the cool stuff down there.
They do.
Indeed, they do. So thanks, Oren, for letting us know about the show that was going on and their anniversary. I want to thank you for that. And also, Oren himself messaged me to tell me about his truck and his project. He has a Series 3 1970, I got to
73, I believe.
75. My apologies. Yeah, I had to get back, scroll back. It's an 88-inch Series 3, and he is in the middle of rebuilding it. And it's a long-term project, and his wife told him to take his time in remodeling and rebuilding it.
Right, because the sooner he finishes up, he's either got to buy another one or he's in the house bothering her.
I think so. The best part about this truck is it has a history to it. He thinks it was an ex-civil aviation service vehicle or maybe a telecom vehicle, and that's pretty cool. I always like when a vehicle has a kind of a neat little history like that to it.
Well, they all kind of have a neat history.
True. Some more than others, though.
Some
right?
more than others.
Important people doing important things, right?
Somewhere for someone doing something. Yeah. I've invited him to the podcast, by the way, but I haven't heard anything. That would be Richard Hammond, for those who may not know. That's who we're referencing.
Thank you for clarifying. I thought you were talking still about Oren.
Warren?
So.
Warren, maybe when he's done with his project, he can come on the show. And
Well,
talk to
or
us
if he
about
needs
it.
to scrub off some more time so he doesn't finish too soon.
And the best part about it is in the background of the picture, there's a Freelander, so he is righteous in my book. So there you go. So thanks, Warren, for listening to the
Or
show.
equally misguided.
Thanks for listening to the show. We appreciate it and sharing your information. Also, one of our listeners in St. Louis.
That would be our good friend Derek. Derek, congratulations for placing first in class at the 35th anniversary or 35th annual St. Louis British Car and Cycle Show. Is that what it is?
Yeah, all British
All British.
Car and Cycle Show.
Car and Cycle Show, first in class.
And that is vehicle UMR 517J.
I believe it's a Series 2A.
Yes, interesting thing we noticed in these pictures. He only shows the picture of the plaque and the vehicle. There's not a whole range of other winners in there. So I wonder how many people are in his class.
I believe it's more than a class of one, which would be a dubious distinction. No, I think it's actually a pretty well-represented show, if I remember correctly.
I think so, yeah. We've seen that in past years. It's been a pretty nice big show, and he's shared pictures with us of it, so pretty cool. So congratulations, Derek, on first in class, and thanks for sharing that information. And also some other events coming up in the near future. MAR, which we had the organizers on a couple months ago on the show, and that's going to take place here in Western Virginia, not West Virginia, but Western Virginia.
And not Western Virginia, which is how the locals refer to their state.
I think Pembroke, Virginia, if I remember correctly.
Yes. The western portion of Virginia.
I thought I was going to be able to go, but unfortunately, due to work commitments, I'm not going to be able to make it. But I am going to try and should be able to make the Overland Expo East this year down in North Carolina.
Which is the following weekend after MAR.
And hopefully meet up with Terry Ann, who will be our guest here in just a little bit on the show. She's going to be there selling her book. I'm going to be there handing out some stickers as I'm having new stickers made. They should be in my hands very shortly here. Bring those down with us. And I think, Morgan, you were just at an event also, were you not?
Yes. Last weekend was the British Invasion car show in Stowe, Vermont, which is a very nice little ski town. So very beautiful place to have the car show, and they have a big showgrounds in the middle of town. It's a couple of football fields size worth, one for the show field, one for parking. So there's just about as much of a show out in the parking lot as there is in the showgrounds. So well worth even paying just the parking fee.
I often find that the parking lot is almost a better show than the show field. I mean, the Trailer Queens are fun, but the stuff they showed up in that they drive every day is always really cool to see.
Absolutely. And the parking lot changes much more frequently throughout the day, so you get a different showing when you show up as to when you leave. So I always enjoy that. And it's not just British vehicles that show up in the parking lot, which is also fun.
Now, what were you showing in the parking lot this year?
I actually showed up in my new to me 2002 Land Rover Discovery 2. But we can get into some of that shortly.
You finally have a Rover capable of self-propulsion.
I do, yes. The show itself is a great show. We had great weather this year. They do the concours, and then they have the People's Choice Field, and then they have a little, sale lot, and then some vendors who show up and sell parts or little knickknacks and stuff like that. And they have a couple of food vendors as well. The concours this year usually it's basically just Jim Macri from Saxons River, Vermont, who has his series Land Rovers there. They're immaculately restored to original factory specs with as many, well, obviously all original parts. I believe he has a 57 Series 1, and then he's got a Series 2 109 and a Series 3 88. So he was there in the concours with those. He also has a D90, a NAS D90 that's in the People's Choice, which does a lot of the towing of his other vehicles. So that's always nice to see it used. So yeah, this year there was also a new addition to the concours, a 70s era Series 3 109 that was also immaculately restored. So that was really nice to see. Looked like it had an Ike Goss front bumper on it. So it was a just nice addition to that. And surprisingly, there's actually a large proportion of the concourse that are Land Rover vehicles. There probably were no more than 10 vehicles in concourse, or at least not much more.
That's good.
So to have 4 Land Rovers, that was really nice. Overall, there were probably a couple of dozen vehicles that were Land Rovers there. Everything from Series 1 to 2A, 3, Defenders. There was one Disco 1, I think, and a couple of Disco 2s. Nice Range Rovers. I didn't see a P38, I don't think, this year. A few classics.
They probably broke down along the way.
Probably.
Were they in the parking lot?
Sitting on their bump stops?
Yeah. Exactly. One of my favorites is actually a Range Rover Classic that was there. I saw it last year as well. I can't remember if it was Manchester or Woodstock Fire Department guy who owns it. It must have been Manchester, because Manchester had an FC 101 that they used until just a few years ago, and he works with them and used to drive that. So that was kind of cool to meet him last year.
With fire department graphics on it?
It did.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I think in terms of his Range Rover, it just had the graphic on the bumper, but okay. Otherwise the FC 101 that they used to have had the big graphic on the side.
That was a working truck for the fire brigade.
It was, yeah.
What function did they use it for?
It was basically for like backwoods fires, like forest fire management.
So it had like pumps and tanks and that sort of thing in it?
I think that one was actually soft top, basically just troop carrier.
Okay. Just to get personnel there to be on the front lines.
Yeah, they sold it a few years ago, basically because all the younger guys on the force thought it would be better to have a newer, more comfortable vehicle. But all the newer vehicles just get stuck easier out in the woods.
Yeah, just a testament to the fact you can't get good people anymore.
Yep. Yeah, there was actually one FC 101 ambulance there, as well as I think it was a Series 3 regular ambulance.
That is the best variant of the FC 101, the ambulance. And
yes.
Also the best variant of the ex-military ambulances.
How many ambulances were built? There was only a small number, right?
Well, actually, in the series truck, the 109 ambulances, there were close to 2,000 of those made for the British military, plus the ones they sold to the Dutch, which was a huge customer for them. And that number I don't have, but I think it was close to 2,000 series ambulances, the last 200 of which were Series 3, 20 of which were produced for the RAF in a special spec, which makes them the ultimate collectible
air
Marshall
portable
ambulance. They did not do an air portable ambulance version, although the Marshall ambulance, such as the Series 3 variant that's in my garage, the one of 180, can be lifted by an aircraft. It takes a bigger aircraft, but it actually has 4 D-rings on it, and it can be hoisted in the air. People often question the strength of those D-rings on the back of the body, and I can tell you I've had my truck dangling from my ceiling by chains. They are
impressive.
Functional. They are functional. And when I need to do frame and suspension work, that's how I do it. A couple big chain falls from the trusses, and I just pick the truck up.
Very nice. Seeing those two military vehicles was pretty fun. There's also a guy who lives in just down the road from me in Charlotte that imports Land Rovers of all types. He used to run a paintball facility up in the area that was he used all Land Rovers there. He had
an off-road paintball facility?
What's that?
An off-road paintball facility?
It was, yeah.
Right on.
I know.
Yeah.
It's closed,
What's
though,
better?
right?
I believe he's no longer running that. Yeah, but it was the kind of thing where he would take you out into the woods in Land Rovers and
Trailside
paintball in the woods.
ambush and
Yeah.
Cool.
So he's a big military vehicle fan. So he's got a Defender that he's rebuilt into a replica of some of the military Defenders with machine gun mounts on it and everything. And that was probably the only vehicle in the show that allowed kids and actually encouraged kids to climb in and play in it. So that was pretty cool.
Typical Land Rover.
It's funny how they always let kids climb on the stuff that has guns on it.
I know.
Well,
exactly.
mount a gun to a Ferrari, and there you go.
And somebody who did that would let the kids climb on it, I'm sure.
Yeah, if you're Ferrari, if you don't mind drilling a hole in it and mounting a gun to it, then you're going to be fine with kids touching it.
Well, mind you, Lamborghini actually did that with the LM002. That was meant to be a military vehicle.
Well, weren't the Lamborghinis originally built from surplus military vehicle parts anyway?
Well, yeah, actually, Lamborghini was a tractor builder, and after the war, there was a large amount of American trucks that had just been abandoned in place when we withdrew from Europe. And so, yeah, Mr. Lamborghini went around and sort of just scavenged all these abandoned vehicles and built farm tractors out of them.
Yep.
And that was his business until Enzo Ferrari pissed him off one day. He'd gotten some fortune and wanted to buy some cars, and he bought a Ferrari, didn't like how the clutch worked on it, didn't like the mechanics of it, and he took it back and complained, and Mr. Ferrari just said, well, you know what? What do you know? You're a farmer. You think you can do better. Build your own damn car. Guess what? He did.
Yep.
There's a little bit of Italian automotive history for the day.
Yeah, so overall, I would highly suggest, anyone stopping by the British Invasion in Stowe. It's always a fun show, good time of year, lots of British vehicles everywhere. And I believe this weekend was Metal Dash weekend, which is, I think, Western Massachusetts for basically all series vehicles, but I think other Land Rovers are welcome, usually.
They will make an exception for plastic dashed series trucks?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. That's good to know.
There's metal under there somewhere.
Well, there is.
There
was metal under there. It may not still be there.
Very, very true. And I think next weekend is the Vermont Overland Rally. Not sure if I'll make that. I had hoped to, but we've got a couple more events coming up.
Good deal. Excellent. Thank you. That's the news for this month. We will be back in just a few moments with the M Word.
It was the year after I graduated from high school. I was living in Denver with my brother, helping him remodel the house he had recently bought. I was supposed to be taking a few college classes and figuring out my career goals, but an abundance of fun projects in the proximity of the Rocky Mountains made academic motivation difficult for me. I'd like to think that taking 10 years to complete a 4-year degree allows for a diverse and enriching educational experience, but the truth is that I can be easily distracted. At the time, I really had no experience in construction or home repairs, but I knew my way around basic tools and the fundamentals of working with wood and metal. How hard could fixing a house really be? My brother had spent his college years living in a big fraternity house with 40 other unsupervised and possibly misguided engineering students, so he'd acquired at least a familiarity with maintaining and modifying older buildings. A fancy engineering degree led him to a good job with a decent paycheck, and after a couple of years of saving up, he was ready to enter the wonderful world of home ownership. And with an eager, hammer-wielding kid brother to do the grunt work, why not do a little remodeling? Together, we were unstoppable, and perhaps a bit dangerous. Well, maybe more than just a bit dangerous. When I wasn't helping my brother spend his paycheck, I kept myself occupied maintaining my TR4 and also my brother's 2 vehicles. His 51 Willys CJ3A and the aforementioned Rocky Mountains provided my introduction to off-roading and off-road vehicles. I was able to go to a lot of cool places where ordinary cars couldn't, hang out, drink beer, and swap stories with like-minded people. I was a bit too young to have many interesting stories of my own, but I was a good listener. One of these excursions also allowed me my first up-close look at a vintage Land Rover. It was a nicely beat-up 109-inch Series 2A. Blue, I think, but don't quote me. My first impression was that although it looked really cool, it also seemed a bit more delicate than they appeared on TV. Clearly, I had much to learn, but I digress. I was having trouble with the school portion of my life. I went to class, but I certainly wasn't doing any damage to the grading curve. At 18, I still had no idea where I wanted my life to take me, or what I wanted to do for a living. I hadn't discovered any good ways to apply the book learning to the real world, so it was near impossible to find the motivation to study. Before long, boredom led to distraction and a new project. Allow me to introduce the Simca 1000, an ugly, underpowered little shoebox of a car, ugly in that special way that only the French could master. It was my first experience with a truly slow car. According to Road and Track magazine, yes, they actually tested it, the acceleration times for 0 to 60 and the standing quarter mile were identical, 22.5 seconds. On the other hand, the slow acceleration was a good match for its wimpy brakes. The transverse front leaf spring and swing-arm rear suspension provided handling that was truly goofy and just a bit scary. But I have yet to drive anything else that could float so dreamily at 30 miles per hour across a freshly plowed cornfield. Looking back, I think this car made me a better driver because it helped me to learn the importance of patience, planning ahead, and being prepared for the unexpected. I found this little gem in the classified section of the Denver Post, made the call, and went to see it. It was a very poorly running but otherwise complete car, and it came with a parts car, also complete but not running and with no title. $100 for both cars, delivered. I just couldn't say no. When they showed up at the house, my brother seemed far less enthused than I, but also far less annoyed than my parents would have been. But parking space was limited, so the plan was to grab a few important bits from the parts car and get the rest hauled away ASAP. However, plans often quickly change. Within a few days, I had found the problem with the engine. Piston number 3 was cracked. Unfortunately, I made this diagnosis after the piston exploded, and the newly freed connecting rod tore a big hole in the cylinder wall. In an instant, a significant but fixable problem became a totally unfixable lump of scrap. So the plan changed. Now I had to free up the frozen engine in the parts car and find a way to get it running for the first time in years. While I was at it, I figured out that the parts car actually had the better body. The plan changed again. Strip both cars, build one good car from the best parts, and ditch the rest quickly before the neighbors get cranky about the impromptu junkyard in front of our house. No problem. The best thing about being 18 is that everything is possible. Actually, as projects go, this one didn't seem too bad. A couple $100 in parts, and about a month later, I was done. Or so I thought. I would soon discover the most serious design flaw in the Simca's drivetrain. The clutch release fork was made from aluminum, not an exotic high-tech forging, but just a cheap die casting of a soft alloy. It was very thin at its pivot point, which was precisely where it would break. Fortunately, I had saved the gearbox from the parts car, so it was a simple enough matter to swap forks, and the problem was fixed, until it broke again. So now I had 2 broken forks, and really no chance of finding replacements. Luckily, I found a guy at a local welding shop who was willing to stitch them back together on the cheap. Neither one of us was overly confident, but they worked for a while. When it broke, I would swap in the other one, and then immediately take the pieces to my newfound friend so I could be ready for the next time. I also learned to adjust my driving style to reduce my use of the clutch. And when I didn't have time to fix it, I drove without using the clutch at all. When I look back on my experience with this craptastic little piece of French engineering, I realize it was probably one of my smartest purchases. Sure, it was a lot of work, but working on weird stuff is fun. Also, it was cheap, it made me a better driver, and it taught me some valuable lessons. For instance, If the car is making a horrible rattling noise, and maybe even billowing out a large cloud of smoke, do not continue to drive it, hoping to figure out the problem. It only makes things worse. Also, if you really understand how to operate a manual transmission properly, you come to realize that the clutch is more of an optional accessory than an absolute necessity. And finally, when I get frustrated because it seems like I'm pulling the gearbox out of the same vehicle every year, I just need to remind myself that there was a time when I was doing it monthly. Suddenly, life seems a lot less frustrating by comparison.
Welcome back to the 42nd edition of the Centresteer podcast for September 2016. And now we have a very special guest with us calling all the way from the four corners of the United States of America. It's Terry-Ann Wakeman. Hello, Terry-Ann.
Hello.
For those who do not know, and they should, Terry-Ann has a fantastic website called expeditionlandrover.info. It is a fantastic resource for Land Rover expedition information, heritage truck info, maintenance, conversions, modifications. And if you are not familiar with her website, you need to be familiar with it. It's fantastic. She drives a 1960 Series 3 109 that is a Doormobile. And
Series 2 109.
I got it. My apologies, Terry-Ann. I have a Series 3, so in my head I automatically always say Series 3 for when I see 109.
Okay.
My fault. And you also have a Triumph. You have a 61 Triumph TR3?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So maybe we'll talk about that a little later. So Terry-Ann has written a new book, and I'm very, very pleased that I got to read it in advance of this. As our listeners know, next year I'm planning to take a continental drive, an overland trip, and Terry's new book, The Essential Guide to Overland Travel in the United States and Canada, an independent resource for independent travel and camping, is coming out in October, and I'm glad I read it. It's very timely because it gave me a lot of good info for my upcoming trip, things I need to prepare for and think about and consider. Terry-Ann, how did the book come about? What was the inspiration?
Well, the inspiration was actually the Overland Expo forum. If you go through the various areas where they focus on individual subjects, a lot of times I found that some really bad information was given out by people who just didn't seem to know a whole lot. And a lot of the information was credited by how you stated it as to whether or not you're an authority. And I wanted to help people have a better understanding of how to do things and how different things tie together. Yes, a lot of information is given out without any real thought to traveling in harmony with nature and leaving no trace behind travel. So it's my way of sort of giving back to the overland community.
It is very well done. The book's broken into 22 chapters. I should look at I should look inside first before I say speak. But broken into different chapters. The one thing was interesting that you made a comment to me. So let me see. There are 21 chapters, and when we were conversing in preparation for you joining on the podcast, you told me to make sure that I read the vehicle recovery chapter because there's some controversial information in there. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure what was controversial because it was all the things I had heard or seen or discussed. What did you think was controversial about vehicle recovery?
Well, the controversial part is generally what the manufacturers and the salespeople will tell you. If you look at the recreational overland recovery industry, there are absolutely no standards that the equipment has to meet. They can label anything they want, any way they want, and mostly they just give you a maximum braking strength, which is an estimated braking strength for new material and it's basically where they expect it to break, but it could break a little sooner or maybe a little bit later. And of course, as the equipment gets used, the strength actually deteriorates over time in use, especially if you don't keep the material clean. I wanted to make sure that people were aware that there are no official standards that they need to comply with, and that the buyer needs to do a little extra investigation to find out what the stuff actually is, and to perhaps look for gear that is tested to a standard.
Yeah, that's something I actually was not familiar with, but you certainly raise a good point that a lot of this equipment is just where it's made, how it's made, what are the specifications for it, and how much it can handle. I do have seen on the trail that when I've been out, that people just pull out their equipment, connect it up, and hey, let's get out of this. Let's recover as fast as possible, and don't sit and think about the issues involved, and also where does their equipment come from. And I'm personally guilty of not cleaning up my equipment as quickly and clearly as I should when coming back off the trail. Yeah.
Well, you know what? One thing that most people, you were mentioning, just go out and immediately start recovering. But what you should be doing is you should identify the problem, think about the problem, come up with a plan to best recover from the problem, then carry out the plan.
From your background, do you have any project management background in your life? Because that sounds very much like a project manager.
Yes, I've run a lot of projects, both at HP and at Apple.
See, I had a feeling. You and I think alike. I've done some project management in my days, and I could hear that thinking as I was reading the book. Stop, plan, assess, have a cup of tea. Because I'm also a big tea drinker, by the way. So I should. That was good to read. Good to know that you're also a big tea drinker. Although you need, I think. You need more in here about having a proper cup of tea. I think you should have a whole chapter on that. Where's the Kelty kettle? And I usually use a jet boil, which is not the best, but it's nice, small, compact. I think you needed you're missing something there. A whole chapter on proper tea making.
Well, tea making just seems to be a minor issue through most of the U.S., though it does seem to be more important on the American East Coast and in Canada. But on the other hand, there's always the second edition.
All right.
Yeah,
all right,
I feel that a lot of people are going to tell me what I forgot to put in or what I might have gotten wrong. And I'll just keep notes for the second edition.
There we go. Good deal. Good deal. So you cover a wide range of topics. I mean, tea is just something that for me is personal to me. But there's clothing selection, drinking water considerations, which I think not a lot of folks think about because especially here in the U.S. and Canada, water is just easy to get to, clean and safe. But something I wrote down on my personal list of things I should have is the word went out of my head. What is it when you to get clean water? There's those tablets and things to clean the water. What did I?
To sterilize or sanitize the water?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's not something that I've even had to worry about really as I'm out traveling. But I can certainly see that even here in the U.S. and I'm sure in some places you want to make sure you have clean water. So that was something I added to my personal list. Is that something you?
Actually. What you're just telling me is that you're mostly traveling towards the eastern part of the country where cities and towns and such are not very far apart.
True. Yeah,
as you head west, you start running into more arid countries where water supplies are further apart. And when you get into a lot of the mountainous areas, there's going to be clear running water sitting right in front of you. The only problem is that clear running water just might carry little bugs that will cause you to spend the rest of the week on the toilet. Going back to tea for just a second, back of my Land Rover, just above the rear door, I've got a little compartment that goes the entire width of the back above the door. You open it up, and I've got space for 7 boxes of tea.
Nice. Okay, so
I always carry a nice selection of tea.
So what's your? Let's talk about tea then. We should geek out on tea. What's your favorite? What do you drink? Black tea, green tea, red tea, white tea?
Well, a lot of times it really depends on the time of the day. For morning, I like something like PG Tips.
Oh, nice. I'm a Yorkshire Gold guy. That's my morning tea. It's wonderful.
Towards bedtime, I'm more interested in chamomile tea. In the late afternoon, it's normally tends to be a black tea with peach in it. But I also carry green tea, oolong tea, and a couple of other brands.
Nice. Loose or bagged?
Well, in the truck, I carry bag tea. It's just a whole lot easier to deal with,
right,
and a whole lot easier to clean up.
Yes, but it's certainly much more convenient, right. Well, I also
you have to make some compromises on the trail.
Indeed. Milk and sugar?
Yes and yes.
Good. Okay, we get along then. That's good because I'm a milk and sugar guy myself.
Myself as well.
And in fact, I think I have to add a refrigerator now to my kit because I'm going to want to have a tea and I'm going to need milk and therefore refrigeration. So okay, there's the use case for getting a refrigerator for the truck.
It's you really need a way to keep food cold, and a compressor type refrigerator is really your very best tool. Ice chests. First of all, they don't get things inside all that cold unless it's buried in the ice, and then your ice is constantly melting. You need to have a good barrier to separate the ice from your food, and you're constantly needing to drain the liquid, unless, of course, you go up into the Arctic in the winter.
In which case, refrigeration is probably needed to keep it not from super freezing.
Exactly.
I like that chapter. That was a good chapter too, because you cover a lot on the considerations for keeping items cold, whether it's the compressor refrigerator, whether it's what's the one that only brings it down within 30 degrees. I forget the type.
Oh, it's a thermoelectric cooler.
That's right, basically a cooler, and then of course typical ice chests and coolers that we would use, for like a weekend trip. So you did a nice job of explaining all those, and even bringing into consideration of the newer ones, that are thicker. The Pelican that makes a really thick one that's good for like 10 days. But yeah, it was a good conversation that you had in the book, and I was like, yeah, you make a good case for having a proper compressor refrigerator, which I think is for the reasons you mentioned.
Yeah, a nice thing about a good compressor refrigerator, you not only have cold food, but for the newer ones, the power draw is so low that it begs for solar power during the day when you're parked.
So yeah, solar power. That's another thing you mentioned in batteries, secondary batteries. Have you considered more than one extra battery? Do you happen to maybe have 3? What's your solar power considerations? I think you did said in the book that you added solar to your Doormobile.
Okay, I currently have 2 batteries. The primary engine battery plus the secondary. The secondary is cut off when the ignition is turned off, so it doesn't drain the primary battery, so I can just drain the secondary flat if I needed to and still have plenty of starting power.
Right.
Now, as far as a third battery, I don't have the space. Push comes to shove. Anytime you build a vehicle, everything is a compromise. Weight's a compromise. Where you put the weight to adjust the vehicle center of gravity is a compromise. Volume is a compromise. You just have to try and find that spot that works for your vehicle. And what hasn't worked for my vehicle in the space that I have is a good propane heater, no space for it. A nice water heater, no space for it. And a third battery, no space for it.
Right. Does that include a shower then? You don't have a shower capability then?
Well, I do, but it's external.
Okay.
I've got a shower tent and a 12-volt pump, which has a hose and a shower head that goes inside the tent. It's a really nice setup that I picked up in England a bunch of years back. The only problem is it takes half hour, 45 minutes to set it up, and then it takes at least that amount to take it down. And I have a strong preference not to put stuff away when it's wet. So I end up just mostly carrying it when I go on long trips, and just doing a sponge bath. Now, one of the interesting things is that the feds and most state parks are putting in showers. Really in need of a shower, just stop off at a federal or state campground. Well, actually, a national park campground and a state campground, because a lot of the BLM campgrounds are pretty minimal as far as what they offer. But, if they're always a good place to stop off when it's time to shower and wash your hair.
Of course. And maybe even get a nice flat space to sleep, right?
Don't worry about that all that terribly much, because there's always a kind of flat area. And what I normally do is park the truck with the nose just a little bit uphill, just so I'm sleeping head up.
Oh, okay. So where is the bed in the Doormobile? Is that because I know the top, cantilevers not cantilevers. It hinges up to give you some more headroom space. But is the bed at right above the sill level I assume on the fenders inside?
Well, first of all, let me mention the top when it's popped up. It gives you just under 8 feet of headspace. Plenty of room in there vertical-wise.
Right.
Now, as far as the bed is concerned, it depends if you've got a 4-door model or a 2-door model like I have. The 4-door model, the front and rear seats actually fold down to make a double bed.
Oh, nice.
Or you can slide them over and have 2 single beds.
Okay.
Now, at the roof level, with the top down, right at the roof level, is a pair of fold-out cots. So when the top's up, your bed is roughly 5 feet above the floor of the truck. So having a 2-door, I can't. I pretty much I sleep on the cot, pretty much above my stove and sinks and such. So it's a bed that's completely out of the way.
And the seats, correct me if I'm wrong, the seats in the 4-door model that fold down, those were custom by Doormobile, correct?
That is correct. And besides folding down, the front seats can actually be flipped over and reversed. So the front seat and the rear seats are facing each other, and there's a little table that you can put in between.
That's cool.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah,
so you can have So basically, you just end up with people sitting over a table facing one another.
You can play cards.
You could.
Time for euchre. Big euchre player here. So my family grew up playing euchre.
Okay, I've never heard that.
Yeah, I have to admit I've not heard of that
You've not
either.
heard of euchre? Wow.
Yeah.
EUCHER or RE, I guess. It came from, I believe it came from Pennsylvania Dutch country, and it's probably a variation of some other card games, but it's a fast game. It's 4 people. They play in a team, and you're across from each other. You only use the 9 through ace, so ace, king, queen, jack, 10, 9, and there's a trump involved, and that changes every time, every hand, and it's a fun, quick game. That's the very basic version of it. But euchre is a lot of fun. Oh, I'm sorry, I always enjoyed euchre. Similar to spades, hearts, but those games usually the trump card is usually the trump suit is always known, whereas euchre it changes every hand. Anyway, well, I okay.
Well, I'm gonna have to look that up and learn it.
Well, yeah, who knew? Yeah, there is a version on my iPhone I play sometimes. It's okay, but it's a fun game. The best part, of course, is when I play with my friends, and then we kind of make fun of each other and yell and scream at each other. It becomes like a full contact sport. That adds to the fun. Don't trump your buddy's ace, and if you do something bad, people yell at you. Yeah, it's all that. It's good fun. There's a little bit of luck involved too, which is adds. It's not all skill. There you go. There's a missing chapter for you for version 2. Is things to do, entertainment while you're out and about.
Well, my assumption on entertainment is that so many people have outside hobbies as well as wanting to travel and see the country. I have friends who spend a lot of time traveling to do bird watching. I've got a friend who's into old railroads, so he combines his overlanding with visiting railroads, and another friend who just likes hot springs. He's got a goal of visiting every hot spring in the country.
Nice. Mine is breweries, by the way, so beer.
Ah.
So that's
yeah, I had another friend like that who, when we traveled together, his wife set our itinerary, so we always were near a microbrewery whenever lunchtime was and whenever dinner time was.
Now that's who I want to travel with right there. That's like when I go to the UK, I've been there a couple times. That was always the plan is you get up about 9:30, you tour something in the UK, you go to the pub, have a drink, have some lunch, go tour something else in the afternoon, and again dinner time, pub, drinks, and then you're done for the day. There's a good day out visiting the UK. Well, looking at the back of the book, and maybe we'll look at some of the other chapters and interesting things that stand out to me. I do not have a dog, but I know Morgan does, and you have a whole chapter on taking pets with you. I know you have is it an Irish Wolfhound that you take with you?
Yeah, it's an Irish Wolfhound.
And how long have you has the Irish? What is the Irish Wolfhound's name? I don't think I ever saw that.
Ah, okay. Well, my current hound is named O'Reilly.
It's a good name.
Yeah, I just sort of figured an Irish dog needed an Irish name.
Yeah, indeed.
Definitely.
And so what are some of the considerations for taking pets? Like, is there size, places you can take a dog, places you can't?
Well, actually, taking a dog really limits where you can go. The National Park Service is basically dog hostile in that you cannot have a dog unattended in the campground, you cannot have a dog unattended in the vehicle, and you cannot take the dog on any of the trails.
Well,
so what it means if you go into a national park, you can stay on the road and you can stay in the campground, but you can't go on any trails. You can't go into their main office building. And the worst national park of all for a dog is Canyonlands National Park. Canyonlands is 90% only viewable with a high-rise 4x vehicle on a trail, but they will not allow dogs off the pavement.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, wow too. Yeah, I once came into Canyonlands through one of the small back roads, and just didn't have to notice the signs, and managed a day and a half before I was caught and escorted out.
What's the availability of kennels in those areas? I mean, is there a lot of them near those parks? So if you do take a dog and you could do maybe a day kennel, or is that kind of rare?
Well, I think that really depends upon the area. But yes, a day kennel, or if you're going into Canyonlands, maybe a couple-day kennel is an excellent idea. Assuming, of course, that your dog is halfway happy staying in a kennel. Now, one thing to note is that the BLM lands generally have more primitive camping facilities, and though your dog pretty much needs to be on a leash the whole time, you have a little more freedom as to where you can go with your dog.
Well, that's good to know. Yeah, I've noticed very similar issues here in Vermont with state parks. We only really have a couple of national forests, but for the most part, all the state parks are not very dog friendly. Some are dog friendly in certain areas, but we have a lot of mountains, like the Long Trail, and some of those trails are dog friendly, but those are very much not sort of short day hikes. They're for long haul hikers and very much pack in, pack out. So differ somewhat from other areas. Obviously, not really off-road areas for vehicles.
Yeah. Well, each state has their own right to set forth their own rules within their state parks. So any time that you go to a park, the first thing you should do is read all of the signs to find out what's allowed, what's not allowed. And a lot of times, most of those signs are there to help you stay safe and help keep the environment clean. But there's normally tends to be a little something about dogs in there someplace. And if you're not willing to abide by it, go to another place.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest things dog related that I see is the number of people who sort of say, oh, well, I can do this. My dog's good, so I'll bend this rule for myself. And that really doesn't help the rest of us. Even
though he's a sight hound, I've trained my dog from puppyhood not to go chasing after animals. So, there's been a couple times, once when we were on a trail, he was off the leash, walking next to me, and a fox came by, and he just stood next to me and watched the fox.
That's good.
Nice.
So he's safe on things like that, but as you had mentioned, because a lot of people don't necessarily train their dogs, they've got rules that fit everybody as opposed to just the good kids. Another thing to be careful of as far as dogs off the leash in the country is that pretty much every state has a law saying that farmers and ranchers can kill dogs that are chasing their livestock. If they're on a leash and the dog takes out after a goat or a chicken or a horse, and the farmer just happens to be armed, your dog can be dead. You need to understand that, and you need to guard against the dog doing that sort of thing.
And I've always grown up with huskies and malamutes, and they are, very wolfish. So even somebody who just misidentifies, it's a big risk.
Except huskies are pretty short.
Yes.
But malamute, I can see where a lot of people at a glance will mistake a malamute for a wolf.
Yep, absolutely.
What's your
So what you need to do is get yourself a poodle.
Yes.
Is there a poodle malamute blend?
I'm sure somebody has done it.
Well, Terry Ann, as I look outside my window at this very moment, and this is very topical. It is pouring down rain. It's a good summer rain. It reminds me of the Doors song. And you actually hear the rain. I'm surprised you can't hear it on the podcast. But so that brings us to clothing. So you talk, and that's why seeing the rain made me think of clothing. I think it's a really good chapter. You have a whole chapter on clothing, different kind of fabrics, and the thing that I got out of that was I don't think people put a lot of thought into it. Is they assume that if they get the latest and greatest, it will handle their situation. Say 95% of the time, and you make the point that just because each clothing has its benefits and also has its deficits, and it doesn't always fit every situation. I'm a big cotton fan, but unfortunately, apparently, I have to not have cotton with me all the time. So that's what I've learned, especially in the cold.
Cotton is really great in some areas, but if it gets wet and it gets cold, it'll kill you.
Right.
Pure and simple.
So do you pack, I guess, for all conditions, even in the summertime? Because depending on where you go, it may get cold, like up in the mountains, I assume. So you probably prepare for all 4 seasons all the time.
You pretty much have to have something for unexpected weather. I mean, one thing I keep stating is that weather happens. And, you can't rely upon just wonderful spring or summer weather, nice and dry all the time.
Or a forecast either.
You can, especially out in the mountains, you could leave for a day hike on a sort of warmish, sunny day, and just on the other side of the mountain where you can't see is a snowstorm coming in. People die because they're not prepared. So I always make it a point to have a heavy coat somewhere in the vehicle and to have a couple things for layering that can help keep the heat inside of an outer jacket, a shell of some kind. It's better to bring some clothing that you don't wear than it is to need something and not have it.
Correct.
And I think that's one of the biggest advantages that we have with overland traveling is that sort of ability to bring extra.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Such as vehicle parts too. That's another thing you bring up in the book is it's you have the space if you're going to have an appropriate size vehicle to bring spare parts and bring the right tools. I assume that's something you have intimate knowledge with and has helped you out on the trail. I assume having an extra, bolt, nut, or you don't have any motherboards. I think you don't have any need for that, but. I assume you have actual knowledge of that, right?
Probably more than I'd prefer to have. There's one thing about the old series trucks is that they have very weak 10-spline axles. And they actually fixed that on the rear axles of the Series 3 109s. But those 10 splines, if you've got a heavier vehicle, you're working it hard, they break.
Indeed.
And they can be a real pain to get to if you break a front axle. Like I was on one trip with a bunch of people. coming down from Canada, and in eastern Montana, going through some snow, I broke a front axle. So what I did was I identified what axle was broken, got on the phone to a mail-order Land Rover parts house, and ordered the parts to be delivered to a campground that I'd previously camped out in Moab. Then I just left the group, hopped on the highway, went to Moab, and started tearing apart the front axle of my truck.
As you do.
So when the parts came, I was just ready to slide them in, and was done just at the same time the group rolled into Moab.
And you were back, and you were ready to go and ready to rock and roll. Which your website,
rock and roll, yeah.
Your website is good for that information. Also, like your personal experience has allowed you to, share the information with the community, and that's why you have one of the reasons you have your website. I'm guessing.
The website started for two reasons. It started in 1998, and I was trying to learn HTML and how to do a website. And I also happen to have a drawer full of little how-to notes scribbled on the backs of envelopes and miscellaneous pieces of paper that I could spend an hour looking for something there. And it occurred to me that if I were to take all those little scraps of things I learned and tend to forget and put them in a website, it would be right there, really handy. And then I just decided that what a great way to share with other people.
And you've done a great service, by the way.
Well, a lot of that website is my desire to share things that I've learned with other people to help them along the way. I've always believed that life is hard enough as it is. So if there's anything we could do that just happens to help someone else, life is better for it.
Indeed, and that's what the web was all about, right? Sharing of information, and you used it for its intended purpose, to share info.
And that's what the book's all about too.
Indeed, and so if I may, on behalf of the greater Land Rover community, of which no one has elected me to be in charge or anything, but I want to thank you for all you've done to share information and keep the trucks on the road, because a lot of what you've done to put the info out there and help people to repair and fix and modify and upgrade their vehicles is keeping the Land Rovers on the road. So, community, thank you.
Yes, and I thank you very much as well. I reference your website very, very frequently, and I found you to be extremely helpful and knowledgeable on, the LRO mailing list and various forums. I'm always stumbling across your excellent answers.
Well, when I first bought my Land Rover, I didn't have much of a clue as to what I was doing. First time I tried to use a socket wrench to remove a spark plug, I actually broke off the porcelain part just because I was trying to do this at a strange angle. And very early on, I met someone who used to own a British car repair shop that was an authorized warranty repair shop for series Land Rovers. He grew up in the UK and went through the traditional mechanics apprentice program. So he was about as knowledgeable on Land Rovers as anyone you could ever meet. And early on, he took me under his wing and spent a great deal of time mentoring me. Whenever I had a problem, I would go over to his house, would sit down on the dining room table with a cup of tea and a couple of crackers and discuss it. And once he gave me all the information he could, we'd go out into a shop area for show and tell. And, as often as not, if I needed a part, he would pull one out of a bin someplace and hand it to me and send me on my way. and I learned a tremendous amount from this person. I just need a way to pass it on.
Well, you've done a great service, and you've done certainly I would say certainly have passed it on, which is good. Hopefully the website will continue long into the future. That sounds a little odd, but have you made provisions for that? Have you thought about that, by the way? Making sure the website continues after when the unfortunate happens.
Well, I've thought about
personal?
it, but unfortunately, I haven't done anything about it.
Yeah.
I really should find someone who is willing to manage the websites long term.
Morgan?
And and once the book is published and bringing in income, I'm willing to tie the website into the book, so the book could pay for keeping the website going.
There you go.
That's an excellent idea, and I have to say, just in terms of, I'm an IT guy. It sounds like we're all sort of in that computer industry.
I think we are.
But there's an excellent organization out there who's probably already helping preserve your website for posterity, and that is Internet Archive. And it's an amazing service for exactly that reason, because you never know what's going to happen to a website, and they go out and they preserve as many websites as they can. It's amazing.
Well,
yeah, but a preserved website that does not have its own easily findable URL, it's useless if people can't find it.
It's true. It's good for reference and research, but it's not the same as having a website that can actually be continued to be maintained.
Right.
For sure.
Well, I'm not even sure it needs to be maintained so much as to be hosted and have the URL paid for.
Absolutely.
Well, Terry, you may not know this, but Morgan does have a similar, I would say similar, has a website called seriesparts.com, and that's why when you mentioned, when you brought this up, I referred to Morgan, because he already kind of manages a website that's close to what yours is doing.
In a similar vein, trying to help people still keep, Series Land Rovers on the road, but not to the technical level that yours is. Yours is an amazing reference.
I've been kind of thinking of asking Ben Smith if he could carry on the site.
Nice.
That's a good idea.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he does a good service for that too, because I know he hosted for a long time my local club out of Pittsburgh, the Fort Pitt Land Rover Group. He hosted that site for a long time. That was very nice of him.
Yeah, and it seems like some of the website he was hosting or taking care of went over to the Ottawa Club area, and I'm not sure that anything that's not theirs has been maintained on the long term.
That's true.
Yeah.
I'm looking for a place that, if the book pays for the hosting and the URL, that can maintain the site indefinitely.
So another thing in the book that I found interesting that I don't think a lot of folks probably consider is communications. You make a number of references to the fact that cell phone is wonderful, but it's not, especially I would think in the West, it is not always the best idea, or maybe your only communication ability. So I guess can you expand upon that a little bit?
Well, most all communications that you deal with are higher frequency line of sight communications, and cell phones need to find a compatible tower in order to talk to somebody else, which is within line of sight to a compatible tower. And if you get into the mountains, your chances of finding a tower are slim. As you get further away from civilization, your chances become extremely slim. I mean, these guys are into it for cash, and they're not going to make money off of a tower if there's nobody there to talk to it.
Right.
So true.
So, yeah, an advantage goes to the sat phones. I mean, if you get, satellites have good coverage if you get a satellite that's not sitting on your horizon someplace. There are companies that are offering monthly subscriptions to a satellite phone. You're not connected until you're ready to go on a trip. You sign up for a month or 2 months, and if you're into an emergency, you get on the sat phone and call for help. Or if you want people to know where you're at, there are sat phone connections that can send a breadcrumb and an OK sign. They had the big Tibetan earthquake, and the Himalayan base camp got just about destroyed from the avalanche. It was a sat phone that told the world almost immediately what happened. And you're certainly not going to get that with a cell phone.
Right.
Or your local CB radio, or even a ham. The portable ham radios are basically a high-frequency line-of-sight communications. And if you can't get to a repeater up on top of a hill, you're pretty much limited to what your antenna can see.
So satellite would be, I guess, even best for the satellite phone would be best for the solo traveler. I'm taking it, and, asking for a friend.
Well, okay. Okay, satellite phone is best in the most primitive areas. Large parts of Alaska, Canada, when you get into the mountains and you get further north, it's about your only communication you're going to get unless you're going to carry a ham rig with 30, 40, 50 feet of antenna. And, when you're in the Rockies, most of the time you're in a valley.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're away from a city, communications can be very spotty. Now, one thing that some of the cell companies are doing is that they're putting their line-of-sight towers near major highways so people can stay in touch with each other along the highway.
Right. Well, and also use GPS, cell phone-based GPS devices.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big Waze fan myself.
I'm sorry, say again?
I'm a big fan of Waze, W-A-Z-E. It's a cell phone GPS app.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, Google bought them, but it's a nice app. And yeah, as long as you're along the major interstates in the U.S., you're always going to have connectivity.
Yeah, which is more and more including the Alaskan highway.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
that's good to know.
Also, one interesting thing about cell phones is that most carriers tend to be country specific. So that if you're going into Canada away from the American border, you might want to pick up a second phone or at least a SIM on a different carrier.
Right, I know. Yeah, Rogers is big in Canada and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very fortunate that most of the phones these days, obviously not all of them, but most of them do support, multiple bands. So it's good to be able to just pick up a new SIM if you're on a compatible carrier.
Yeah, but it is something that you need to be aware of. Yeah, for absolute reliability, I really don't think anything is going to match a satellite phone. I mean, it's still expensive to talk, but it's a whole lot cheaper than it used to be, and there's a whole lot more satellites up there than it used to be. But it's, as long as that phone can see a satellite that's compatible, you've got communications.
And are those coverages usually sort of by hemisphere? In terms of like northern, central, or southern?
It really depends upon the carrier and where their satellites are located. In the book, I tried to mention the different primary characters or carriers and what kinds of satellites they have. There's a geosynchronous satellite that just sits over one place, and then there are also satellites that just travel around the world, and they hope to have enough satellites that you'll always see one of them. But a satellite that's a little closer to the equator is going to be really hard to get to if you're up in Alaska or the Canadian territories. You need to pick your carrier and then pick the phone that is compatible with that carrier. And which carrier you pick, should be compatible with where you're going. It's a lot like cell phones. You find out who's got towers in your area, and you buy a cell phone that's compatible with the carrier and buy the SIM.
You talk a lot about this early in the book, but I think it's probably one of the most important things to discuss and bring up, especially for the new overlander, is testing out your equipment, testing out your capabilities, testing out what you like and don't like, and taking shorter trips before you make your major trip. I guess, can you talk a little bit about that, and I guess have any practical examples? Have you seen where folks have taken a long journey and it crumbled within a week or two because something failed because they didn't know that they didn't know what Euchre was, as an example, and knowing the card game destroyed the trip.
I was going to ask how frequently that happens. Euchre destroying trips, that is.
You need to travel with me more.
Well, it depends on how active people get with each other while they're playing it.
Sounds like it, yeah.
I think you know me, yeah.
But yeah, I sort of look at learning the skills of traveling as being similar to earning merit badges in scouting. That you just can't expect to go into the camping gear section of your big box store and grab a bunch of stuff, throw it in the car, and go out on an epic trip of a lifetime. If you don't, your gear is your lifeline. If you don't know how to use it, if the gear is not fit for your intended use, you can be in a world of hurt. I think you're mentioning cotton clothing early on. If all of you got a Levi jacket and a cotton T-shirt and Levi's, and you find yourself out in an ice storm, you're dead. It's very simple. Gear is not always simple, and it needs to be maintained, but most of all, it needs to be suitable for what you want it to do, and you need to know how to use it. And it's real easy to go out and let's just grab a camp chair. Just go in and grab a camp chair, take it with you. You sit on it, and the first thing you notice is that it's not comfortable. It doesn't fit. You sit on it a couple times, and you need help getting out after a half hour or so. And then it just breaks because it can't support your weight. You need to find, your tools need to be suitable for its use, and you need to know how to use it. It's really that simple. And then you need to know how to maintain it.
I have a practical, actual story for you. It completely fits this. I just remembered as you were telling me this. I have some family members who I won't name. They were, it was their oldest was about to go to college, so they took the summer off from their jobs. They took their kids, loaded up they got a trailer, loaded up the trailer. They were going, and then loaded up their minivan, and they were going to drive all the way to the West Coast. The epic trip, take 2 or 3 months, camp along the way, bicycles, golf equipment, cameras, you name it, everything you can kind of think that someone would do. Family taking that epic family trip to out to the West Coast. They leave Pennsylvania. They get to I'd say about an hour into West Virginia, and have trouble making it up one of the hills, and get to the top of the hill and figure out that the transmission had burned up because it was the trailer was too heavy. Mm-hmm. And they thankfully could continue their journey because they borrowed borrowed another vehicle that thankfully could handle the towing. But there's where trip prep ahead of time and not weighing and not understanding all the capabilities of what you were using, caused them some problems.
Yeah, it's like tents. Different designs can handle different amounts of wind, and most of them cannot handle a snow load more than a quarter inch. Most dome tents, you get into a 40, 45 mile an hour breeze, and they will just about collapse on you. Mm-hmm. So you need to know the differences in strength of construction of different tents and how they're built. You don't want to take a summer tent off into the Arctic during the winter. On the other hand, a four-season tent may be awfully hot for doing summer camping in Phoenix. Your gear needs to be appropriate for where you're going, your expected environment, and your unexpected environment.
So what I'm hearing you say is you need to do your research and you need to do some studying ahead of time. And I think I know where you do that. There is a book that you can buy now, and it's called The Essential Guide to Overland Travel in the United States and Canada by Terry Ann Wakeman.
Well, I do try to give some people an idea of what to look for, rather than just say, buy this, buy that. I try to explain why you might make one choice over another, depending upon your individual circumstances.
And I think you've done a great job at that. I think the refrigerator is an excellent example, or the chilling ability in the vehicle is an excellent example, because that's something I knew about, but I didn't really had considered before or even think about. But then you did a nice job of laying that out. And of course, you do that with everything else: clothing, camping gear, recovery gear for your vehicle. So this is the guide, folks. If you're thinking of overlanding, as I am, even for a short trip, you want to go out and check out Terry Ann's book. Terry Ann, there's one thing that shocked me about your book that really caused me concern. And I'll say it in one word: bears.
Oh.
The more I read about talking about bears, I'm like, oh no, because we have bears here in Western Pennsylvania, but where I camp and where I've gone, usually there's too many people, and you don't have to really worry about bears. And I don't know. So I don't know. Tell us some more about bears. Should I really be worried?
Well, black bears are probably the least offensive of the bunch. And then as you go west and go north, you run into the grizzlies, and then you run into the big Kodiaks. And then, of course, you run into the polar bears, which you'd really prefer not to. Black bears tend to be a little bit more shy, a little easier to scare off. But as you were mentioning, large groups of people. Large groups of people tend to leave trash out, tend to leave dirty cooking utensils out, and that can cause problems. Now, what normally happens is that your park officials are normally working overtime capturing bears that have grown used to people and have been raiding camps, and either transporting them someplace else or killing the bears. I always feel it's best to do your part to try and make sure that there's nothing out there available for the bear to eat.
Well, it's more than that, though. There's, you need to seal up anything that you've used to cook with and make sure they can't smell it. As you say in the book, bears 10 times better smell than dogs do, which was shocking to me. I didn't know that. You should make sure you don't have any. If you cook in clothing, you shouldn't wear that at night in your tent or in the truck because they will smell that and be attracted to it. That's where I got a little concerned, I guess. Those are things that kind of threw me off. I had not been aware of.
Yeah, it's something you should be a little more concerned about as you go further away from civilization, and yet are close enough that there's a lot of campers there. A lot of it pays to be prudent.
Correct. Yes.
And tell you the truth, when it comes to grizzlies, I'm about as big as chicken as they come.
Have your dog?
Well,
did your dogs help out?
There's an interesting story, and what it is how do you tell brown bear scat from grizzly bear scat, and how do you protect from them? And what the answer is that when you're in bear country, you normally carry pepper spray and put bells on your shoes so you're always making noise so they always know you're coming. And how do you tell the scat between the two? Well, the grizzly scat is the one that smells like pepper and has little bells in it.
You should put that in the book. That's a version. That's got to be a version 2 of the book, 2nd edition. That's a good story.
That's excellent.
But as you go into grizzly country, it really pays to be even more prudent.
Well, let's address the grizzly in the room, and that is why a Land Rover. This is a Land Rover podcast, after all. We talked a lot about just general things, and you were not very specific in the book about vehicle selection. But let's focus a little more on Land Rovers. How did you become interested in Land Rovers, and how did the Doormobile come into your life?
Okay, well, I'm going to back off on that just a little. I was not specific about Land Rovers just because I wanted the book to apply to everybody, and each of us has our own preference for the type of vehicle that we prefer. So I was looking more at function than the mark itself. Now, as far as my history with Land Rover, I had started as a little girl watching television back in the 50s. There was a whole lot of travelogues, a lot of hour shows where people would go out into darkest jungles of Africa and explore and have pictures of
Wild Kingdom?
Of wild animals, wild kingdoms.
Yeah.
And
I remember Wild Kingdom.
Yeah, and veritably, these folks were driving Land Rovers. So I got it into my head that if you're going off the map to that area that reads "Here be dragons," the best vehicle to get you in and back out is a Land Rover. And when I was in college, I was sharing a house with a number of other college students, one of which made money on the side by doing some mechanic work. And he brought in a Land Rover once to replace the wheel bearings, and I actually saw my first Land Rover. And once the bearings were done, I had a chance to drive it around the block, and it just reinforced my idea that Land Rovers were magic. One day I went to sell the vehicle I had and was looking in the paper for another vehicle, and I saw this ad for a 1968 Land Rover 88. When I read the ad, my mind just sort of let loose on the possibilities of going places that is little traveled, so I went out and bought it.
How much? I'm just curious.
Do
you remember?
I think I paid, about $5,000 for it.
That was I think that would be a lot back at that time, right? That seems.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was about 75 or so.
Yeah.
And it was in 68, so it wasn't all that terribly old. It was in good, it was in good running shape, looked nice. After a couple of years, I found that the short wheelbase just didn't have the cargo space that I wanted to go out camping. And on a sunny November afternoon, right after about a week and a half study of rain, I just felt the need to visit old places that I used to live at, and went to a house, and sitting out in front was this long wheelbase Land Rover that was obviously neglected. Its tires were about 2 or 3 inches into the dirt, and had been obviously used as a kid's toy. So I went up and asked him if it was for sale, and the guy said, yeah. And I got some history of it. The owner of the truck inherited the truck from an uncle in New Hampshire, and he drove it out to California. He really didn't know that you put oil any place except the engine. Now, he was in the craft fairs and did craft shows between Seattle and San Diego. So he drove the truck up and down the coast until the rear differential ran dry. He put it in four-wheel drive, continued his travels until the transfer case went dry. And luckily, that was within a mile or two of his house, so we just had it towed home. And it sat there for a few years before I found it. And I figured, well, I can learn how to fix this thing. Basically, $350 changed hands, and I towed it home.
Oh, there's the $350. I thought the original one was $350. Okay, $350, and that's the current Doormobile that you've been driving. Did you convert into a Doormobile? I'm asking too many questions at once.
Yeah, I bought the truck in March of 1978. So it was 38 years ago. It was only about 18 years old at the time, but it was totally worn out, missing a bunch of parts, and thankfully about that time was when I developed a relationship with my Land Rover mentor, who taught me enough to get it going again, and it's just been going ever since. But at first it was really kind of funny, in that almost every bushing was this big oval hole, and half of every bolt was unscrewed. And if you go over a little speed bump, it sounded remarkably like a galvanized bucket with a bunch of loose nuts and bolts bouncing up and down.
All of us are familiar.
And one problem that happened right away that took me a little while to figure out was that if I turned the corner one way, the engine would everything would be fine. But if I turned the other direction, the engine tried to die on me. But once I got finished with the corner, it was running okay again. Finally, just looking and looking and looking, I noticed that there are two studs that hold the carburetor into the intake manifold. One of the studs was missing, and the other one, the nut was screwed halfway off. So if I went to turn in one direction, the carburetor tried to fall off. Then when I finished the corner, it went back up again, straight up again.
There you go. Typical series ownership there, right there.
Yeah, the truck is full of lots of stories like that.
That should be your next book.
It took a while to replace all the bushings, get all the bolts tied, and my mentor helped me with parts and just replace things that were totally worn out and replace missing parts. And over time, it got to be pretty dependable.
And how many miles do you have on it now, do you think?
Oh, God, I'd hate to guess.
Is this the original engine?
Oh, gosh, no.
I didn't think so, but I had to ask.
I wouldn't be surprised if I had $500,000 on it.
Nice.
I really wouldn't.
Yeah. Is it your daily driver?
Well, that and the TR3 are my daily drivers.
Nice.
They're the only two cars I have.
Wow, nice. Is that the only two cars you've ever had after you got the Doormobile, or have you had other cars?
Well, I got the Doormobile in '78. I got the Triumph in '86, so that's my new car.
You sound like Jeff Aronson.
Nice.
But yeah, in between the two, I also had a '68 MGB. One thing I've discovered was that I can keep two cars running almost, most of the time. If one goes down, the other one's normally in pretty decent running shape. So I always have, with two cars, I always have one, and most of the time have two. But when I had a third car in the mix, I just didn't have time to keep everything going.
We've heard that before. That sounds typical. Sounds very, very typical.
So rather than turning cars into land statues, I got rid of the third car.
Have you been out of the U.S., out of North America? Maybe rephrase that question. Because the book talks a lot about overlanding in North America, but have you overlanded outside the country? I assume the Doormobile has not left the continent, but it's worth asking.
Well, certainly Canada.
A continent. I said continent.
Well, you also said outside the U.S.
I did.
No, actually, I just did one short shot down in Mexico. I don't know the language. I just didn't feel all that safe just being a woman driving by myself in Mexico, to tell you the truth. I did once, a few years back, have a European trip set up. I've been saving money for several years and felt that I had enough to ship the Land Rover to Europe, then spend spring, summer, and early fall touring Europe and hitting the major Land Rover shows. But about a month and a half before I was due to load the truck into a ship, I came down with gallbladder stones that had to be taken care of immediately. And unfortunately, at the time, I did not have insurance. The gallbladder operation was $74,000.
What?
Oh, wow.
And guess where my trip money went?
Your gallbladder.
Yeah, wherever the gallbladder went. But
Did you get that framed, or turn into a petrified?
no, I never saw it again.
No, I don't blame you.
It's probably for the best.
And I never saw my trip money again either.
No, unfortunately.
But that was going to be my epic trip of the lifetime.
Yeah. You familiar with the Bells, Graham and Louisa Bell, traveling? They're South Africans traveling the world, and they're 130.
There are so many people traveling the world these days in Land Rovers. I may be, but I tend to forget or forget names and who is at the time. I mean, a few months back, I hosted a couple from Belgium who were on a round the world tour in a 110. Their 300 TDI blew a head gasket, and so they stayed at my house for a week while they ordered parts, had the parts delivered, and took the head to a local machine shop to get it resurfaced.
Well, that was nice.
And then I run across a few other people who have been on trips around the world.
Mm-hmm. The Bells have been on the show, and they wrote a book called "We Will Be Free," It's actually a pretty interesting read. They're traveling with their 2 children, who are now, they're not children anymore. I think the oldest is 17 and the youngest is 12 or something. But they're going to come back in the U.S. here very shortly, and hopefully they're going to stop by my house. That's the plan, and we're going to have a party.
Oh, cool.
You're invited, by the way, if because you're going to be over this way in the East Coast, right? You're going to Overland Expo East, correct?
Yeah, I'm going to Overland Expo East, but my current plan, if I sell a lot of books, that I will just go to the Atlantic and head south, and then just follow the ocean around into the Gulf, and then when I hit the edge of Mexico, to diagonally go up to Roswell and look for flying saucers.
Sweet.
Very nice.
Well,
so
see,
I've never been to the Gulf states east of Texas, so I figure, well, if I've got gas money, it's my chance to do it.
Absolutely, you should do that. Well, so I saw you came to Pennsylvania, and it's on your website where the states you've been to. Where exactly in PA? I have to ask because I live in Pennsylvania.
To tell you the truth, I don't know.
Well, I'm inviting you to come.
A lot of times, all I do is follow the road, and if I see a sign that looks interesting, I went through a lot of, a number of small towns with really interesting names. I think one of them was like Bird in Hand or something.
It sounds like closer to Philly.
I tend not to write down on maps where I've been, and I mostly travel by whim.
Nothing wrong with that. Near Philadelphia, there's Intercourse, PA, Enterprise, PA, Bird in Hand. Yeah, that sounds like that's closer to the Philadelphia, which is where Euchre, by the way, was probably started in the U.S. See, it all comes together.
Well, in a way, it's almost where I started out, because one branch of my family did settle in Pennsylvania as part of William Tell's fleet. Well, as it turns out, there's probably over a half dozen different branches of my family that started out in the New England area, in the 1650 area, and a few that started off across the river from the Jamestown colony about 40, 50 years after it was started. A whole lot of branches of my family are 1650-ish somewhere along the East Coast.
That's really cool. I can trace mine back only to my mother's father came into the country in 21, 22. So I was like genealogy. Mm-hmm. It's good to know that you can trace it back that far.
Well, it's interesting, and thankfully, once I got past the 1850s or so, a whole lot of my genealogy was already there, mapped out.
That's very fortunate.
Well, it's interesting that I had one, however many great-grandparent who was killed in the French Indian War just when his wife was pregnant with his first child. And I found at least 5 relatives who were in the Revolutionary War, 2 of which died in the process. Yeah, it's interesting learning about your family roots. And, I almost blame that on my wanting to just go out and wander around the countryside and the areas least traveled. Because looking at my family roots, it just seems every generation went from areas that started to get populated to areas that weren't populated. Nobody could stand being in a big city.
Well, Terry, and you have to come to Western Pennsylvania then, because that's where the French and Indian War started. And if you like UFOs, there was a incident that is not far from my house called Kecksburg, and they have a little display there. It's a very small little town, but apparently in the 50s, some sort of. I'm sure it was one of these Air Force testing vehicles that we as we found out now. But it apparently crash landed here in Westmoreland County, and again not far from my house near Kecksburg, and it looked like a honeybee hive, like the bubbly looking one, kind of inverted, and they have a little stand there. The military came in. It happened at night. Military came in, cleared it out, told everybody to be quiet, and next day nothing happened. It was like, this is like 54 or something like that. So that's if you like that stuff, you can come up and visit after Overland Expo. I should see you at Overland Expo, by the way. I am planning to attend, and I will stop by and say hello.
Well, like I said, on this particular trip, it's to the Atlantic and then south, because that's an area I haven't been. But one thing that I keep thinking I would like to do in the future is head on up to Prince Edward Island in Nova Scotia and follow the fall colors south.
Yeah, you should do that. That's
I haven't done that, and it seems like a fun thing to do.
The time to do that is, I think, starting now, because they obviously a little earlier in the season than the rest of the country.
But, it's all going to depend on how well that book sells.
Well, let's push the book. That's why you're on the show, right?
Oh, well,
where do people...
Mostly. I'll have to say that, mostly.
That's okay.
But
that's the primary reason. I know that I know you were concerned about coming on and talking to us, and hopefully we've treated you well, and hopefully you've enjoyed the experience. But let's face it, the real reason was to push the book so that people can go out and get it, learn information, and do their own overlanding trips. Where do people find the book, and when? I know it's not out yet, so that's why I asked that question.
Okay, the book is going to be launched at Overland Expo. Right now, I'm sitting about 15 feet away from me are 200 books. So I'll be taking those with me to the Expo in the sincere hopes that I'll sell most of them. And after the Expo, the books will be available through Amazon.com, or if you're outside of the country, Amazon.uk or whatever. And once I get back home, the book's website is going to have a Buy It Now button.
Sweet. And that website will be?
I'm sorry, say again?
What will the website be?
Well, the website's already there.
So you're using the same one, expeditionlandrover.info?
No, that's my regular website. The book has its own website, and it is overlandtravel.us.
Wonderful. Overlandtravel.us. Of course, we'll have that in the show notes.
That's right. And if you come to the Expo and purchase a book, you get my autograph with it. If you get it through Amazon, obviously no autographs. And if you buy it through the website, you get an autographed copy. Or if I just happen to be at an off-road event, after the book is introduced, I'll probably have books in the back of the truck.
Good deal. Well, we do have listeners from around the world, so it's important to let them know where they can get it. That's not in person. Maybe someone outside the U.S. will help you out. How much does the book cost, by the way?
Okay, the book itself is $64.95.
Cheap at twice the price.
Well, I was actually hoping to bring it in a whole lot cheaper than that, but when I first started looking at printing options, these things are a whole lot more expensive to print than I was hoping for.
Yeah. You're self-published?
And the book has a lot of pictures, and those pictures really want to be in color. If I did the book in black and white, the printing price would be about half that.
Well,
but I think the book would have lost a whole lot of its impact.
I agree. And you're self-published, so that also explains you're not going through a publisher, so that explains what may be perceived as a higher price, because in your limited quantities, I assume, that all goes into what ends up being the cost of the book.
Well, when I looked at the supply chains, if I go through Amazon, I don't get a whole lot at that price.
Right.
but if I went the bookstore route, I would actually have to pay the printer about $4 or $5 per copy I sell.
Oh, wow.
Wow. I think, the Bells, I think, encountered the same thing, because you can buy their book from their website, and they get like 90% of the cost of the profit, if you will. But I know that going through Amazon, you can buy their book, but they get like 30% of the cost. So, yeah, that sounds like a lot of the self-publishing is, or just publishing a book has gone that path. It's easier to self-publish.
Well, in my case, through Amazon, it's probably more like 15%.
Really? Well, okay.
I make some money, but not a whole lot. But it's a way to make the book available to more people.
I highly recommend the book. I've read it, and it's fantastic, especially if you're considering overlanding. If you are considering overlanding and it's not in the U.S., a lot of the information in North America, a lot of the information still applies. It's as Terry has indicated and explained, she doesn't actually go in and tell you go buy this or go buy that piece of product, but these are things you need to think about. This is the considerations. This is what they do. This is what they don't do, and you need to consider. So that information is kind of evergreen, really. It's good. It's good for here in North America. It's here for the remaining continents too. So I would highly recommend, even if you're not in the U.S., consider the book, buy it. You'll ship internationally? I guess that's a good question. I should have asked ahead of time.
Oh, of course.
Of course, she'll ship internationally. Wonderful. And if you tell her you heard about it on the website, she'll sign the book, maybe? Can we give a little something, a little spiff?
Oh, I'll always sign the book.
Wonderful. Terry Ann, I am very pleased that you've joined the show. I was working on getting you to join for several months. When I came up with the idea of the podcast, you were on my short list of folks that we wanted to talk to, and that was 3 years ago. And I'm so glad this all came together, and you were able to join us and talk about your book and talk about Land Rovers in general. Thank you very much for joining us and coming on the show today.
Well, of
yes,
course,
thank
Land
you
Rovers
very
are
much.
always one of my favorite projects.
And it shows. So go out to check out our website. We'll have links to all the information we talked about for her book, where you can get it. And in a couple weeks, we'll be at Overland Expo. Not only myself, but Terry Ann will be there. And that's where you can get the book. So if you're going to the Overland Expo, stop by the booth or table, whatever it is. I don't know. And
I'll be in the author tent. And I would just love to meet new people, and there's a lot of people on the East Coast that I've met on previous trips, and I'd love to renew acquaintances.
Wonderful. Thanks, Terry Ann. I'll see you in a couple weeks at Overland Expo.
Okay, you take care.
And thank you very much. I look forward to purchasing the book and being able to give a little back to you for all that you've given to the community.
Well, thank you.
That's the podcast for September 2016. I want to thank our contributors, Harold joining me. Thank you, Harold. And joining us from the Vermont state is Morgan. Thanks, Morgan.
Thank you.
And also a big shout-out, thank you to Terry Ann Wakeman, whose book, The Essential Guide to Overland Travel in the United States and Canada, comes out at the Overland Expo Show East, and will be available at the show.
Yeah, please show up and buy them from her so she can afford to go home and not have to haul them all with her.
Exactly.
And support her for all of the information that she's given to the community all these years.
Absolutely. She's been an invaluable resource. And that's why I said earlier, if you don't know who she is, you really haven't had a rover very long.
Yeah, check out her website. Of course, I'll have it in the show notes, but it's expeditionlandrover.info, and you can check out her website. It has all sorts of information on updating, fixing, and your rover, and also overlanding information.
The most comprehensive compendium of gear ratios to be found on the internet.
It's so true.
In every possible well, not every possible, but all the common permutations of engine, gearbox, rear end, transfer case, etc.
So thanks again, Terry Ann, for joining us on the show. I really appreciate it. She was a really good guest, and we got some good information out of her. Actually, I think some of the best information was after we were done recording.
The after show is often the best part of the podcast.
Yeah,
the part that our listeners don't get to hear.
Yeah, that was stuff we shouldn't share, but was interesting to hear nonetheless. We have guests lined up for the next couple months, and I think Alloy and Grit editors are lined up for October. Is that right, Morgan?
I believe so. We're certainly trying to have them on here. Look forward to the launch of their new magazine.
I did sign up for the magazine, so I think you can get a discount if you are interested in the a North American-focused Land Rover magazine. And they have some nice pictures I've seen so far on their Instagram and Twitter accounts. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the show, and thank you for listening. Remind you to visit our website for past shows if you want to hear those, or maybe hear them again. And also all the show notes, which have links to the things we discussed today. You can also connect with us, as many people have already done, on Facebook and Twitter. Give us some feedback, or on the news we talk about, or any of the topics that we mentioned today, autonomous cars, for example. And you can now directly sponsor the show through our Patreon account. Patreon is patreon.com/Centresteer. Of course, center in the British spelling. If you would like to be a sponsor of the show, hey, send me an email. We also have listeners from around the world, as you know. In particular, shout out to Oren, who was in Australia. Let us know about the show. So if you are from somewhere not in North America, or even if you are in North America, give us a shout out. Say hello. Let us know what you're doing, what you're up to. We'd love to hear from you, even if it's just a picture or maybe some information about Land Rover that you may lust after or are interested in. Until next time, I ask you to share the show with a fellow Land Rover owner. And thank you for listening. I'll see you at the Rover and Expo.
Land Rovers were magic.